and welcome to Manchester, New Hampshire. We are honored to be here at St. Anselm College with our partners, Apple News and WMUR, for tonight's Democratic debate. And what a week it has been in American politics. We heard from the president at the State of the Union, the Senate with their vote to acquit President Trump, and the Democratic voters of Iowa, who after days of confusion seem to have delivered a split decision to Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg. 4 days from now, the voters here in New Hampshire will weigh in, and the chair of New Hampshire's Democratic Party said today that this is probably the most consequential New Hampshire primary debate ever. We're going to do our best to make it a full and fair test, and I'll be joined in the questioning tonight by my colleagues, World News Tonight anchor David Muir, ABC News Live anchor Lindsay Davis.
George, as you know, 7 candidates have qualified for tonight's presidential primary debate, meeting the criteria established by the Democratic National Committee. All are seeking the Democratic Party's nomination for President of the United States. Tonight, for the first time, you can experience the debate with live real-time updates on Apple News, watching on your iPhone, too. And there you'll also find the candidates and where they stand on the issues. And we want to hear from you tonight. If you hear something during the debate, have a question or a follow-up, send your suggestions on the Apple News live feed, and our team will be pouring through it all.
We are excited to be here on the beautiful campus of St. Anselm College, home of the Hawks, and home also of our 4 debates, the last 4 presidential elections. And here in the Sullivan Arena, we are joined by a live audience of 1,400 people, most invited by the Democratic National Committee, and of course, some of the brightest minds of the student body here. A little later, we'll be joined by news anchor Monica Hernandez and political director Adam Sexton from our partner WMUR with questions that are especially important to the voters here in New Hampshire.
The podium placement is based on an average of the candidates' current standings in recent state and national polls, with the leading candidates in the center. So let's welcome the candidates for the Democratic nomination for president, starting with businessman Tom Steyer.
Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Former Vice President Joe Biden.
Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders.
Former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
And businessman Andrew Yang. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's Democratic candidates for President of the United States.
And as the candidates now make their way to the podium, the rules of this debate are very basic. They've been established in advance. Candidates will, in fact, have 1 minute, 15 seconds to answer a direct question and 45 seconds for a rebuttal or a response, as directed by one of the moderators. Candidates will each see green and yellow lights indicating how much time they have remaining, and when time is up, the light will turn red. So here now, the New Hampshire Democratic debate.
Candidates, welcome. Vice President Biden, the first question is for you. In the last few days, you've been saying that Democrats will be taking too big a risk if they nominate Senator Sanders or Mayor Buttigieg. But they came out on top in Iowa. What risk did the Iowa Democrats miss?
Well, they didn't miss anything. This is a long race. I took a hit in Iowa, and I'll probably take a hit here. Traditionally, Bernie won by 20 points last time, and usually it's the neighboring senators that do well. But I'm no matter what, I'm still in this for the same reason. We have to restore the soul of this country, bring back the middle class, and make sure we bring people together. And so it's a simple proposition. It doesn't matter whether it's this one or the next. I've always viewed the first 4 encounters, 2 primaries and 2 caucuses, as the starting point. And so that's how I view it.
But why are Senator Sanders and Mayor Buttigieg too big a risk for Democrats?
Well, you know that with regard to Senator Sanders, the president wants very much to stick a label on every candidate. We're going to not only have to win this time, we have to bring along the United States Senate. And Bernie's labeled himself, not me, a Democratic socialist. I think that's the label that the president's going to lay on everyone running with Bernie if he's a nominee. And Mayor Buttigieg is a great guy and a real patriot. He's a mayor of a small city who has done some good things, but has not demonstrated he has the ability to, and we'll soon find out, to get a broad scope of support across the spectrum, including African Americans and Latinos.
Senator Sanders, let me give you the chance to respond first. President Trump certainly thinks this label socialism will work. At the State of the Union, he said socialism destroys nations. He's never going to let socialism destroy American health care. And before the Super Bowl, he joked with Sean Hannity about your honeymoon in Moscow. Those hits are going to keep coming if you're the nominee. Why shouldn't Democrats be worried?
Because Donald Trump lies all the time. Doesn't matter what Donald Trump says. It's a sad state of affairs. It really is. People say terrible things about Joe. He has ugly, disgusting things about Elizabeth, about Amy, about anybody else who is up here. But I think, George, that at the end of the day, the way we defeat Donald Trump, and everybody up here, by the way, is united. No matter who wins this damn thing, we're all going to stand together to defeat Donald Trump. I believe that the way we beat Trump is by having the largest voter turnout in the history of this country. And that is appealing to working class people who have given up on the political process because they don't believe that anybody is hearing their pain, perceiving their pain, feeling their pain. And we got to bring young people into the political process. I'm very proud that in Iowa, we won the popular vote by 6,000 votes. What was most significant is we increased voter turnout for young people under 29 by over 30%. We do that nationally, we're going to defeat Donald Trump.
Let me follow up there, and then we'll move on. But back in Iowa, the turnout this year was about the same as it was in 2016, far below what it was in 2008 when President Obama won.
That's true, and that's a disappointment, and I think all of us probably could have done a better job in bringing out our supporters. But if there is a good spot, a good aspect about that campaign is that young people came out in higher numbers than they did during Obama's historic 2008 campaign. And if that happens nationally, we're going to win and defeat Trump.
Before I move on to Mayor Buttigieg, let me just ask, is anyone else on the stage concerned about having a Democratic socialist at the top of the Democratic ticket?
I'm not.
Senator Klobuchar?
Bernie and I work together all the time, but I think we are not going to be able to outdivide the divider-in-chief. And I think we need someone to head up this ticket that actually brings people with her instead of shutting them out. And when I look at a state like New Hampshire that had a very, very close election last time in 2016, I see a state that, yes, has a high voter turnout of fired-up Democrats, just like my state, which, by the way, Bernie, when I led the ticket, had the highest voter turnout of any state in the country. But I add to that being able to bring in independents like you have in this state, as well as moderate Republicans, because there are so many of them out there that are looking for a candidate. And truthfully, Donald Trump's worst nightmare is a candidate that will bring people in from the middle, the people that are tired of the noise and the nonsense, and they are tired of the tweets and the mean stuff, and they are looking for someone else. And I would submit that that is me.
Mr. Steyer, is socialism a problem?
I don't think there's any question, George, that after this week, there's a real threat that Donald Trump can get reelected. And I don't think there's any question but that the only way that we're going to beat him actually is the way that Bernie Sanders said, which is to get turnout across the spectrum of Democratic voters. And that means we're going to have to appeal across the spectrum, moderates, progressives, and every group. So unless you can appeal to the diverse parts of the Democratic Party, including specifically the black community, including specifically Latinos, if you can't do that, then we can't beat Donald Trump in November, and we can't choose a candidate who can't do that. And I am doing that right now with 24% of blacks down in South Carolina, with high numbers in Nevada. That's what it's going to take, is turnout, but turnout across the spectrum of Democratic voters, someone who can pull, as Amy said, everything together in every single way we're divided.
Andrew Yang, then Senator Warren, then Mayor Buttigieg.
First, let me say, America, it's great to be back on the debate stage. Thank you. I'm so excited, I want to give every American $1,000 a month. George, the entire capitalism-socialism dichotomy is completely out of date. And the fact is, when people were talking about these economic models, they did not foresee technology getting stronger, more powerful, capable of doing the work of thousands of humans in the blink of an eye. We have record-high corporate profits in this country right now, but people in New Hampshire know what else are at record highs. Mental illness, stress, debt, substance abuse, overdoses, suicides. What we have to do is actually get the markets working to improve our family's way of life. Instead of following GDP and corporate profits off a cliff, we should be measuring our own health and wellness, life expectancy, mental health and freedom from substance abuse, clean air and clean water, how our kids are doing. The way forward is a new human-centered version of capitalism that actually uses the markets to improve our families' lives.
Senator Warren, you reportedly said back in 2018, I'm a capitalist to my bones. Senator Sanders says, I'm not. Is that your biggest difference with Senator Sanders?
Oh, Bernie and I have been friends for a long time. We have a lot of things in common, and we have a lot of things that we differ on. But you know, this fundamental question about how we bring our party together, we have to think about it in new ways. People across this country, whether they're Democrats, Independents, or Republicans, understand that we've got a government right now that works great for those at the top, works great for giant drug companies, just not for people trying to get a prescription filled. Works great for oil companies that want to drill everywhere, just not for the rest of us who see climate change bearing down upon us. When you see a government that works great for those who can hire armies of lobbyists and lawyers and make big campaign donations, and it's not working so great for everyone else, that is corruption, pure and simple, and we need to call it out for what it is. Corruption. And that's what we can run on. We bring our party together. It's an issue we can all agree on and fight for to end the corruption. We're the Democrats. We should be the party on the side of hardworking people. And we can bring in independents and Republicans on that. They hate the corruption as well. My anti-corruption plan, good for Republicans and Democrats. That's not only how we bring our party together, that's how we're going to win in November.
Mayor Buttigieg, early in the campaign, you said that the word socialism has lost its power. It's mostly lost its meaning. Do you believe that, or worry it could be a potent weapon in a general election?
I'm not interested in the labels. I'm not interested in what Republicans are going to say. I'm interested in the style of politics that we need to put forward to actually, finally turn the page. In order to win, yes, but also in order to govern. This is a moment where the next president is going to face challenges the likes of which we hadn't even thought of a few years or decades ago. And politically, we're facing a fundamentally new problem with President Donald Trump. So the biggest risk we could take at a time like this would be to go up against that fundamentally new challenge by trying to fall back on the familiar, or trying to unite this country at a moment when we need that kind of unification, when our nominee is dividing people with a politics that says if you don't go all the way to the edge, it doesn't count. A politics that says it's my way or the highway.
Are you talking about Senator Sanders?
Yes, because we've got to bring as many people as we can into this process. Look, All of us have been saying that we can build the majority that it's going to take in order to win. But the process of actually proving it is now underway. And now it comes to New Hampshire, a state that thinks for itself, is not going to be told what to do by anyone, and that has a very independent streak, that is going to respond to those who are reaching out in a politics of addition and inclusion and belonging. Not one that beats people over the head and says they shouldn't even be on our side if we don't agree 100% of the time.
Senator Sanders, your response.
Needless to say, I've never said that, but let me tell you what I do say. The way you bring people together is by presenting an agenda that works for the working people of this country, not for the billionaire class. The way you bring people together, Republicans, independents, Democrats, progressives, conservatives, you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. The way you bring people together is to make it clear that we're not going to give tax breaks to billionaires and large corporations. They're going to start paying their fair share of taxes. That's what the American people want. And I'll tell you something else. The way you bring people together is by ending the international disgrace of this country being the only major nation on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a human right. And you bring people together by telling the pharmaceutical industry they're not going to charge us 10 times more for the same prescription drugs as the people in Canada that borders on New Hampshire. That's how you bring people together and you defeat Donald Trump.
Mayor Buttigieg, you just heard Senator Sanders make health care the center of his speech. Do you think his health care plan can bring people together?
I think there's a better way. You know, it's true. The American people are ready. There's a historic majority right now. Even broader than what was available to President Obama a decade ago, there is now a majority ready to act to make sure there is no such thing as an uninsured American and no such thing as an unaffordable prescription, just so long as we don't command people to accept a public plan if they don't want to. That's the idea of Medicare for all who want it. My point is, what I am offering is campaigning for all of these things that America wants. Yes, higher wages, doubling the rate of unionization in this country, making corporations and the wealthy pay their fair share, delivering health care and college affordability, but also offering a way to do these game-changing transformations that will actually galvanize and energize, not polarize, the American people. That is not only what we need in order to win, it's what we need in order to govern and actually get these things done.
Vice President Biden, how do you unify the country?
Well, look, Bernie says that you have to bring people together and we have to have Medicare for all. But Bernie says, and he says he wrote the damn thing, but he's unwilling to tell us what the damn thing's going to cost. The fact that we're in New Hampshire, a very level-headed group of people, look at the numbers. How much is it going to cost? Who's going to pay for it? It will cost more than the entire federal budget we spend now, more than the entire budget. The idea middle-class taxes aren't going to go up is just crazy. When they did it in Vermont, what happened? They doubled the state income tax and then had a 14% tax on withholding, and they finally did away with it. So how much is it going to cost? When you ask Bernie that, I'll ask him again tonight sometime. If you ask Bernie that, he says, go figure. I don't know. We'll find out. I think that was on CBS. He said, we'll find out, or something to that effect. Imagine you're going to unite the country, walking into the Congress, say, I got this bill. It's going to provide Medicare for everybody. I can't tell you how much it's going to cost. We'll find out later. It's likely to be double whatever everything we spend in the federal government. Who do you think is going to get that passed? I busted my neck getting Obamacare passed, getting every Democratic vote. I know how hard it is.
Senator Sanders.
Well, for a start, what the studies show, if we do what Joe wants, we'll be spending some $50 trillion on health care over the next 10 years. That's the status quo, Joe. That's what Health and Human Services says. What we have got to do, Joe, what we have got to do is understand. Simple question, Joe. We are spending twice as much per capita on health care as do the people of any other country. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that the healthcare industry last year made $100 billion in profit. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that we are wasting $500 billion a year trying to administer thousands and thousands of different plans. What Medicare for All will do is save the average American substantial sums of money. Substantial, be much less expensive than your plan. And we will expand Medicare to include dental care, eyeglasses, hearing aids, and home health care as well.
Vice President Biden, 30-second response, then Senator Klobuchar after that.
30-second
30 seconds response.
30-second response. My proposal gives you a choice. You're going to be covered. You have Medicare if you want it. You turn out, we're going to restore all the cuts that they made in Obamacare. We're going to reduce drug prices, reduce prescription prices, reduce copays, et cetera. And it costs a lot of money. It costs $750 billion over 10 years. I tell you how I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to raise the capital gains rate so you pay capital gains and what your tax rate is. That'll pay for it. That's $800 billion. But here's the deal. The fact is that it's going to cost, Bernie's plan costs double what the taxpayers are paying for every single program we spend on in the United States of America.
Senator Klobuchar.
I keep listening to this same debate, and it is not real. It is not real, Bernie, because 2/3 of the Democrats in the Senate are not on your bill, and because it would kick 149 million Americans off their current health insurance in 4 years. And let me say what else. Elizabeth wants to do it in 2 years. And Pete, while you have a different plan now, you sent out a tweet just a few years ago that said, henceforth, forthwith, indubitably, affirmatively, you are for Medicare for all for the ages. And so I would like to point out that what leadership is about is taking a position, looking at things, and sticking with them. I have long believed that the way that we expand health care to more people and bring down premiums is by building on the Affordable Care Act with a nonprofit public option. That is the best way to do it. And practically, look at this. The Affordable Care Act is now nearly 10 points more popular than the President of the United States. So why would we talk about blowing it up? What we need to do is build on it. Mental health care, addiction, long-term care. Those are the things that would make it better.
Senator Warren and Mayor Buttigieg, you were both invoked. I want you each to respond and then go back to Senator Sanders.
So I think we need to think about health care a little differently, and that is 36 million Americans last year couldn't afford to have a prescription filled, and that includes people with health insurance. I want everyone in here to think about what that means. They were worried enough or sick enough that they went to a doctor. A doctor looked at it and said, that's serious enough to write a prescription. They walked out and then said, it's either that or groceries. It's that or pay the rent on time. We have got to change our health care system. The way help to the most people as quickly as we can. How about we start with what a president can do? I love saying this, all by herself. On day one, I will defend the Affordable Care Act, and I will use march-in orders to reduce the cost of commonly used prescription drugs like insulin and HIV/AIDS drugs and EpiPens. We can start making health care better for Americans from the beginning, but we have to agree to do that. We are the Democrats. We are on the side of expanding health care. When we come up against Donald Trump, the team that has been trying to take away health care from millions of people, what's going to matter most is we are the people on the side of those who need health care across this country. That's who Democrats are.
Mayor Buttigieg, I want you to respond to that, but also take on the argument at the beginning from the vice president that you don't have the right experience to be president.
Sure. Well, first of all, just to be clear, the truth is that I have been consistent throughout in my position on delivering health care for every American. And as to experience, I just bring a different perspective. Look, I freely admit that if you're looking for the person with the most years of Washington establishment experience under their belt, you've got your candidate, and of course it's not me. The perspective I'm bringing is that of somebody whose life has been shaped by the decisions that are made in those big white buildings in Washington, D.C. Somebody who has guided a community written off as dying just a decade ago through a historic transformation. Somebody who knows what it means to be sent to war on orders that come out of the Situation Room. We need a perspective right now that will finally allow us to leave the politics of the past in the past, turn the page, and bring change to Washington before it's too late.
Vice President Biden, there's his answer.
The politics of the past, I think, were not all that bad. I wrote the Violence Against Women Act. I managed the $900 billion Recovery Act, which in fact put millions and millions of dollars into his city before he came and helped save his city. I was able to do it. I was able to pass the chemical weapons ban, arms control, and I was the first major leader holding public office to call for same-sex marriage. So I don't know what about the past of Barack Obama and Joe Biden was so bad. What happened? What is it that he wants to do away with? We were just beginning. It was just the beginning of what will be the future of moving this country beyond where it is now in significant ways. And there's ways to do that. And one of the ways to do that is to make sure you have someone who knows how to get things done and can lead the free world at the same time.
Mayor Buttigieg respond, then Senator Sanders.
Those achievements were phenomenally important because they met the moment. But now we have to meet this moment. And this moment is different. The next president is going to face challenges from global health security, like what we're seeing coming out of China, to cybersecurity and election security challenges that were barely thought of a few years ago. And here at home, we're seeing things like gig work transform what it means to be a worker in America in ways that were barely conceived of not that long ago. We cannot solve the problems before us by looking back. We have to be ready to turn the page and change our politics before it's too late. And I'm seeing everywhere I go, not just fellow Democrats, but a striking number of independents and what I like to call future former Republicans ready to join in that historic American majority to turn the page.
Senator Klobuchar.
I am listening to this about meeting the moment. And my first thought is, I'm a fresh face up here for a presidential debate. And I figure, Pete, that 59, my age, is the new 38 up here. The second thing I think about is this, and that is...
New 50.
Okay, there you go. Meeting the moment. We had a moment the last few weeks, Mayor, and that moment was these impeachment hearings. And there was a lot of courage that you saw from only a few people. There was courage from Doug Jones, our friend of Alabama, who took that tough vote. There was courage from Mitt Romney, who took a very, very difficult vote. There was courage, as I read today, about Lieutenant Colonel Vindman being escorted out of the White House. What he took courage. But what you said, Pete, as you were campaigning through Iowa, as three of us were jurors in that impeachment hearing, you said it was exhausting to watch and that you wanted to turn the channel and watch cartoons. It is easy to go after Washington because that's a popular thing to do. It is much harder, as I see Senator Shaheen in the front row, such a leader. It is much harder to lead and much harder to take those difficult positions because I think this going after every single thing that people do because it's popular to say and makes you look like a cool newcomer, I don't think that's what people want right now. We have a newcomer in the White House, and look where it got us. I think having some experience is a good thing.
Senator Sanders, then Mayor Buttigieg.
George, look, at the end of the day, we got to ask ourselves a very simple question, whether it's health care, in fact, or anything else. Why are we the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all people, pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, have 87 million people uninsured or underinsured, 30,000 die because they don't get to a doctor on time, and 500,000 people going bankrupt for what reason? Because they have cancer or heart disease or Alzheimer's. We got to ask that question. Why is it? Why have we been talking about health care in this country for 100 years? And here is the answer. If you want real change in health care, at the end of the day, you're going to have to take on the insurance companies and tell them the function of health care is health care for all, not huge profits for the insurance companies. You're going to have to take on the drug companies and their corruption and their price fixing and tell them, sorry, we're not going to pay 10 times more for prescription drugs than do the people of other countries. But at the end of the day, there's no way around it. You may want to nibble around the edges. But ultimately, we need to rally the American people to tell the drug companies, to tell Wall Street, to tell the insurance companies, to tell the fossil fuel industry, this country belongs to all of us, not a handful of special
Mayor
interests.
Buttigieg, wrap this up and then we...
I have heard this conversation on this debate stage from these people now every single debate, and they're all right. Everybody on this stage is better on economic justice and health care than anybody in the Republican Party, and a million times better than Donald Trump. That is not the question in front of us today. The question in front of us today is, how are we going to beat Donald Trump? You were in the Clinton campaign in 1992, and the mantra was, it's the economy, stupid. Well, if you look at what Mr. Trump is saying, he's saying those words. It's the economy, stupid. I trust every one of these people a million times more. But we're going to have to take Mr. Trump down on the economy, because if you listen to him, he's crowing about it every single day, and he's going to beat us unless we can take him down on the economy, stupid. And that's the issue here. It is not about who has the best health care plan. All the health care plans are better, a million times better. The question is, who can go toe-to-toe with Mr. Trump? Who can take down Mr. Trump because he's the real threat to the country? And let me say, you have to have experience to take him down. This is not a question of he's a nice guy who's going to listen. We need people with experience. That's why I'm worried about Mayor Pete. You need to be able to go toe-to-toe with this guy and take him down on the debate stage, or we're going to lose. And that's actually the issue in front of Democratic voters. I have heard this debate so many darn times, and I love all these people, and they're all right. If we win, we can get the right thing, Bernie. I am with you. If we win, we can get the right thing, Pete and Amy. But we got to win, or we are in deep trouble, and we keep not talking about the facts.
Mayor Pete.
Here's how we're going to win. Here's how we're going to win. We're going to force this president to stand on that debate stage next to somebody who actually lives in a middle-class neighborhood in the industrial Midwest, in the exact kind of community that he pretends to speak for but turns his back on. We're going to put up somebody who's not afraid to call out things like his disgraceful behavior at the National Prayer Breakfast and remind Americans that God does not belong to a political party. We're going to win by having somebody up there who can call him to account for his refusal to serve when it was his turn and remind him what serving this country is really about. If we want to beat this president, we've got to be ready to move on from the playbook that we have relied on in the past and unify this country around a new and better vision. That's how we're going to win. And when I talk about exhaustion, this is important, because I got to tell you, the American people from outside of Washington, we feel a sense of exhaustion watching the division and the dysfunction there. And that is not to take anything away from the very good work that you and our other Democratic members of Congress and the Senate are doing. It's not. But the reason I raise that sense of exhaustion is I see it. I see that temptation to walk away from it all among so many people that I've spoken to in communities from Claremont to Manchester and in the other states that we're in. And the important thing for the American people to remember is this is 2020. It's an election year. And if the Senate was the jury before, you are the jury now. The American people are the jury that will have the final verdict on this president and on the senators in the GOP who protected him.
Pete, fundamentally, you are missing the lesson of Donald Trump's victory. Donald Trump is not the cause of all of our problems, and we're making a mistake when we act like he is.
That's right.
He is a symptom of a disease that has been building up in our communities for years and decades. And it is our job to get to the harder work of actually curing the disease. Most Americans feel like the political parties have been playing you lose, I lose, you lose, I lose for years. And you know who's been losing this entire time? We have. Our communities have. Our community's way of life is disintegrating beneath our feet. That's why Iowa, a traditional swing state, went to Trump by almost 10 points. That's why Ohio, a traditional swing state, is now so red that I'm told we're not even going to campaign there. So these communities are seeing their way of life get blasted into smithereens. We've automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs and counting. We're closing 30% of New Hampshire stores and malls, and Amazon, the force behind that, is literally paying zero in taxes. These are the changes that Americans are seeing and feeling around us every day. And if we get to the hard work of curing those problems, we will not just defeat Donald Trump in the fall, but we'll actually be able to move our communities forward.
I know we're going to hear a lot more on this. We're going to move on to Lindsay Davis.
Thank you, George. Good evening, candidates. We come to you, of course, just 48 hours after the acquittal of President Trump, a process that certainly crystallized the divide in our country. Senator Warren, I want to start with you. You have said that on day one of your presidency, one of your first orders of business will be to order your Justice Department to launch new investigations into the Trump administration. After a grueling impeachment and what is likely to be a polarizing election, is investigating President Trump the best way to try to unify the country?
Look, I think no one is above the law, and that includes the President of the United States. We watched on Wednesday as Republicans, all but one, locked arms to protect him from impeachment. But we need to reestablish the rule of law in this country. I believe in an independent commission in our Justice Department that investigates crimes committed by our own government. It is an important part of accountability. It is an important part for every administration that we hold ourselves accountable to the American people. Look, people around this country are losing faith in our government. They're losing faith that government works for them. They see a government that just works great if you're rich. It works great if you're a lobbyist. It works great if you're a corporate executive. But they see themselves and their children with less and less and less. And we could do something about it. It's not enough simply to talk about the future. We have to be willing to stand up to those who now control our government and make that government instead work for us. We can do child care in this country for every baby. We can invest in our public schools. We can cancel student loan debt for 43 million Americans, but only if we are willing to take control of our government away from the giant corporations and billionaires, return it to the people. This is about our government. This is about our democracy. This is about our future.
Mr. Yang, you said that the notion of a leader, quote, throwing the president before them in jail is not the way things are done here in the United States and would make it, quote, very hard for any party to govern sustainably moving forward. Does that mean that any alleged misconduct by the president or his administration should not be investigated?
There are, of course, limits, and you have to see what the facts are on the ground after you assume office. But the fact is, if you look around the world, the countries that have thrown past presidents into jail have generally been developing countries. And unfortunately, that's a pattern that once you establish is very, very hard to break. What's a more American tradition? We move the country forward. We don't focus on the mistakes of the leaders that are leaving office. Most Americans do not care about what a particular individual did so much as they care about their families' well-being, their community, their town. That's where Americans' focus wants. They want the American president. They want the president, of course, the American president. Sorry about that. They want the president to be focused on that, and that's where our attention should be. We should not fall into a pattern that has been disastrous in other countries.
Senator Sanders.
Along with Elizabeth and Amy, we sat for 2 weeks listening to the impeachment process. And here's what I think the horror and the danger of what happened was: not only the acquittal of Trump, who in fact committed impeachable offenses and obstructed Congress, it is the precedent that it set. The precedent that it set. And what that precedent is about now is, in the future, you're going to have presidents who say, hey, Governor, you want highway money? You better support me, or you're not going to get it, because I am the president. I can do anything I want. Hey, Congress, you want to investigate me? Don't be ridiculous. Who cares about the Congress? Who cares about the separation of powers? Who cares about the Constitution of the president? I'm the president of the United States. I have all of the power, and I'm able to intimidate members of my own party. The saddest aspect of this whole thing is you have Republicans in the Senate who knew better. They knew that Donald Trump is a crook. They knew that Donald Trump is a cheat, but they didn't have the guts, with the exception of Romney, to vote against him.
Mr.
That is a sad day.
So I did start the Need to Impeach movement in October of 2017. And my father was one of the people who prosecuted the Nazi war criminals after World War II. And that's part of the reason I started, because when you see something really wrong in the United States, you're supposed to stand up against it and fight against it, and that's what I was doing. But the Republicans have rolled over. They've had a sham trial. They've refused to have witnesses. They've covered up the truth for the American people. And it doesn't matter anymore that he's a crook, and he's always been a crook, and he always will be a crook. Right now, what we have to do is we have to beat him in November. And we have to beat him because he's incompetent and bad for the American people. And that's the case we have to make now. Is he a crook? I knew that 2 years ago. Is he going to be more of a crook now that he believes he can get away with anything? Of course he is. But the job of the people on this stage is to beat him in November. And that's going to be based on what we can deliver for the American people. The fact that he's incompetent as a president, his economy isn't delivering for working people, the jobs don't pay enough for people to live on. We've got to take him down on the economy and get him out of the White House as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Steyer. Impeachment is, of course, over, but Republicans in Congress have already started investigating Vice President Biden's son, Hunter. Mayor Buttigieg, do you think that there's a danger for the Democratic Party to nominate a candidate who is still under the threat of investigation?
No. And we're not going to let them change the subject. This is not about Hunter Biden or Vice President Biden or any Biden. This is about an abuse of power by the president. Look, the Vice President and I and all of us are competing, but we've got to draw a line here. And to be the kind of president, to be the kind of human being who would seek to turn someone against his own son, who would seek to weaponize a son against his own father, is an unbelievably dishonorable thing that is just one more example of why we as a party have to be completely united in doing whatever it takes at the end of the day to make sure that this president does not get a second term.
Vice President Biden.
Look, I thank my colleague for saying that. It is a diversion. But here's the deal. Whomever the nominee is, the president's going to make up lies about. He thinks he has free reign right now. One of the things that I think is really important is we have to be authentic with the American people about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And by the way, Colonel Vindman got thrown out of the White House today, walked out. I think we should, and at the same time, he should be pinning a medal on Vindman and not on Rush Limbaugh. And I think what we should be doing now, I think we should all stand and give Colonel Vindman a show of how much we supported him. Stand up and clap for Vindman. Get up there. Who we are. That's who we are. We are not what Trump is.
Thank you, Vice President Biden. The Democratic Party's last presidential nominee, Hillary Clinton, has criticized Senator Bernie Sanders' track record in the Senate.
I'm sure we were able to hear that question.
Okay, sure. The Democratic Party's last presidential nominee, Hillary Clinton, has criticized Senator Bernie Sanders' record in the Senate, saying nobody likes him, nobody wants to work with him, he got nothing done. Senator Klobuchar, you serve with Senator Sanders in the Senate. Is he going to be able to get the support? Not if you like him, but is he going to be able to get the support that he needs from Republicans?
Okay. I like Bernie just fine. We actually have worked together on a number of things, including pharmaceuticals. We actually had a vote late at night one time, Klobuchar-Sanders amendment, to bring in less... No. It was not. To bring in less expensive drugs from other countries, since in this great state of New Hampshire, like in Minnesota and Vermont, we can see Canada from our porch. And we ended up getting, I think, 14 Republican votes. And they might not have noticed what was happening late at night, but we got those. And I think that it is just an example of what we need to do here, because I've been listening to this discussion. I agree with my colleagues. We must unite. But the way that we unite is by having an optimistic economic agenda for America. That is what we must do. And that means taking on a president, if you want to talk about being tough enough to take him on, taking on a president that literally went down to Mar-a-Lago after he signed that Republican tax bill and looked at all his friends and said, you just got a lot richer. That is Exhibit A for those carpenters in Pennsylvania and those dairy farmers in Wisconsin and those dock workers that I met with in Michigan. That is an Exhibit A. And we have to be able to make the case to the working people of this country, some of whom voted for Donald Trump, that we have something better to offer, that we are going to take those incredibly regressive parts of that tax bill and put that money into their child care, into their
but just a quick yes or no. Do you think that Senator Sanders will be able to get Republican support in order to pass his bills?
That I don't know. I know we did on that bill, but the point is, I think we're better off with someone that has the receipts, someone that has actually won big time with Republicans and independents. And I'm the only one up on this stage, you can check it out, that has consistently won in red congressional districts. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And when I did it, I didn't just do it for me. I led a ticket. I flipped the state house every single time because I have a way of working with people that I think should be valued here as we look at these candidates. And it's one of the reasons that I got the New York Times endorsement along with Elizabeth, and that I got the endorsements of the 3 major papers here in New Hampshire, which is the Union Leader, the Seacoast papers, and the Keene Sentinel. I think that matters. Read those editorials, and you will get a sense of what I'm about.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sanders.
I must confess, I don't get too many newspaper editorial support. Must confess that.
You got the Conway endorsement.
I did. We're very proud of that.
There we go.
But let me just say this. I think the question started off with Secretary Clinton's critique. I think, quite honestly, as we face one of the great political crises facing America, our job is to look forward and not back to 2016. And I hope that Secretary Clinton and all of us can come together and move in that direction. Now, second of all, in terms of Republicans, let me say that in my own great state of Vermont, my memory is correct, Amy, I got 25% of the Republican vote. And in fact, there were periods when I was in the House of Representatives, a number of years, where I passed more amendments on the floor of the House in a bipartisan way than any other member of the House. And that is when you bring people together on an issue. There are many conservative Republicans, for example, who are concerned about civil liberties. At least they used to be concerned about civil liberties. There are Republicans, as you know, who are concerned about the high cost of prescription drugs. There are ways that we can work with Republicans on issues where we have a common basis. Let's do that.
David.
Lindsay, thank you. Good evening, all. I want to turn to America's role in the world and readiness to be commander-in-chief on day one. Just this week, you saw it, during the State of the Union, President Trump offered an indication of what he'll tout on the campaign trail. He celebrated the U.S. airstrike that killed top Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, saying Soleimani was the Iranian regime's most ruthless butcher, a monster who murdered or wounded thousands of American service members in Iraq. Mayor Buttigieg, you're the only veteran standing on this stage, and while there's still debate about whether or not there was an imminent threat, there is no debate about whether or not Soleimani was a bad actor who was responsible for the deaths of many Americans. Given what you know about Soleimani, if your national security team came to you with an opportunity to strike, would Soleimani have been dead, or would he still be alive under your presidency?
In the situation that we saw with President Trump's decision, there is no evidence that that made our country safer. Look, I feel very strongly about the campaign of murder and mayhem that General Soleimani and his units have perpetrated. It's also the case that if we learned nothing else from the war in Iraq, it's that taking out a bad guy is not a good idea if you do not know what you were doing. This president has moved us this much closer to the brink of war, but it didn't start with the Soleimani strike. It started with withdrawing us from the Iran nuclear deal that his own administration certified was working. And it's time for us to recognize that every time a step is taken that moves us to the brink of war, that has incredibly serious consequences for those who serve. By chance, just because I was traveling for the campaign, not long ago I ran into somebody that I hadn't seen since we were both serving, hadn't seen since she was injured in an insider attack. And I saw her coming down the concourse in the airport wearing a Wounded Warrior Project t-shirt that said, "Some assembly required." And when I asked her how she was doing, she lifted up her knee and tapped on the part of her leg that they couldn't save, tapped on the prosthetic, and said the Navy had fixed her up just fine. And then let me know that she was looking forward to an upcoming deployment. People in our uniform will do whatever the United States requires of them. What they deserve in return is a president who will actually read the intelligence, pay attention to the international security situation, consult with our allies, keep U.S. politics out of it, and never commit our troops to a situation where they would have to go into harm's way if there is an alternative.
Mayor Buttigieg, let me just press further on this, though, because President Trump has signaled in a general election campaign he will celebrate his willingness to order that strike. I'm asking, if your national security team came to you and presented you with the opportunity, would you take the strike?
It depends on the circumstances. It depends if there was an alternative, and it depends what the different effects would be. That's my point. This is not an episode of 24. This is a situation that requires that you actually evaluate the entire intelligence picture. This president has insulted the intelligence community, but they put their lives on the line to gather the information that will help a decision maker evaluate whether or not something like that is justified. And I don't think he even reads it. And here we have a situation where the world, one of the most volatile places in the world, has just become more dangerous at the hands of a president who has no regard for the military, not only punishing a war hero today with what he did to Colonel Vindman, but pardoning war criminals in a way that undermines the entire sense of good order and discipline and military honor. We deserve a better commander-in-chief.
Mayor Buttigieg, thank you. I do want to take this to Vice President Biden next, because we know that the Obama administration was aware of the threat that Soleimani posed. So was the Bush administration before it. I'm asking tonight, as Commander-in-Chief, though, would you have ordered the strike?
No, and the reason I wouldn't have ordered the strike, there's no evidence yet of imminent threat that was going to come from him. Look what happened. His America First policy has made America alone. You cannot think of a time, David, and as long as you've been alive, when NATO has said to the United States of America and to Iran, made a moral equivalent, said, both of you stand down. We are alone now, alone in that region of the world, without friends, without support, without allies. And secondly, you saw what happened when that air raid, when those missiles were fired from Iran into Iraq at Al-Assad Air Base. 64 of our heroes were wounded. I don't know what I would have done if my son were still there. I would have been so damn angry, I don't know what I would have done. But here's what happened. They received traumatic brain injury. What did the president say? He said, headaches. Not bad. Headaches. That's all they are. This guy doesn't deserve to be commander-in-chief for one more day.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. Senator Sanders, you have called this assassinating a government official.
Yeah.
You would not have ordered the strike.
Right. Look, here is the danger, David. There are very bad leaders all over the world. Kim Jong-un in North Korea is probably responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of his people, threatening all of Asia with nuclear weapons. You got Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, who is a terrible murderer, who murdered Khashoggi in cold blood and dismembered his body. You have Putin in Russia, who has been involved in political assassinations of his enemies. You got Xi in China, who's put 1 million Muslims into concentration camps. You cannot go around saying, you're a bad guy, we're going to assassinate you. And then you're going to have, if that happens, you're opening the door to international anarchy. That every government in the world will then be subjected to attacks and assassination. What we have got to do, which Trump does not understand, is strengthen the State Department and our diplomatic capabilities, not just the military. What we have got to do is bring countries around the world together with our power and our wealth and say, you know what, let us sit down and work out our differences through debate and discussion at the UN, not through more and more war and the expenditures of trillions of dollars and the loss of God knows how many lives.
Senator Sanders, thank you. This does take me to Afghanistan and to America's longest war. And Senator Warren, you recently said, quote, we have one general after another in Afghanistan who comes in and says, we've just turned the corner. And then what happens? It's all the same. Someone new comes in and says, we've just turned the corner. You said so many say it, we're going in circles. We were on the ground in Afghanistan and in Iraq in recent months, and the generals told us that the U.S. needs some U.S. presence on the ground, U.S. Special Forces, some presence to go after ISIS and the terrorists. If you're commander-in-chief, would you listen to the generals, or do they fall into the category of the generals you mentioned before?
No, look, I sit on Senate Armed Services Committee, so I get to the briefings from the generals on a regular basis. I've been to Afghanistan, to Iraq, I've been to Jordan, I've been throughout the region. I've been there with John McCain, I've been there with Lindsey Graham, to ask the hard questions about what's happening, to ask our generals, to ask their generals, to ask people who are on the ground. And the bottom line is nobody sees a solution to this war. Nobody can describe what winning looks like. All they can describe is endless war. And I realize there are people on this debate stage who are willing to say, yeah, we'll leave our troops there for 5 more years, for 10 more years. Lindsey Graham has said he's willing to leave troops for 100 more years. And yet, what has all these years of war brought us? Right now, the Afghan government controls less than 60% of the land. People don't have faith in it. It's a corrupt government. The opium trade is higher than ever. Look, we sent our troops in and they did their best. They were there for us, but we need to be there for them. And that means not send our troops to do work that cannot be solved militarily. It is time to bring our combat troops home. It is time to stop this endless war in Afghanistan.
So, Senator Warren, I want to press you on this. You just said combat troops.
Yes.
So if the generals came to you and said, we need U.S. Special Forces, some footprint in Iraq and Afghanistan, would you listen? Would you leave them?
So I want to hear the plan. Not just a, we need it now, we need it for the next day, we need it for the 6 months. And I want to know where our allies are. We all have an interest in dealing with terrorism and controlling terrorism, but that means it can't just be the United States waging endless war. That does not make us safer. It does not make the region safer. It does not make the world safer. We should work with our allies in managing terrorism, but we need to end this war in Afghanistan. We cannot wait 5 more years or 10 more years or until we turn the corner 10 more times. We need to bring our combat troops home.
Senator Warren, thank you. I want to take this to the Vice President, because you have said of Senator Warren's comments before that the United States should get out of the Middle East. You have said, I quite frankly was surprised that I have never heard anyone say with any serious background in foreign policy that we should pull all troops out of the Middle East. Is Senator Warren wrong on this?
I'm not sure what she wants to pull all troops out of the Middle East. But if she does want to put all troops out of the Middle East, we saw what happens when that happened. I helped put together a 61-nation group to take out ISIS by putting fewer than 5,000 forces along the Turkish border to see to it that they lost 10,000, the Kurds lost 10,000 lives. They defeated ISIS, they ended the caliphate, and then the president on a whim, dealing with a man I know very well, the guy running Turkey, who's more of an autocrat now than a Democrat. And what happened? We pulled out, and you saw what happened. You saw the end of the effort to be able to continue to contain ISIS, number one. Number two, close your eyes, everybody. Remember what you saw on television. You saw a woman standing up there holding up her baby, Kurds saying, please don't leave us. And our military women and men standing, going out in their up-armor Humvees with their heads down, ashamed of what they did. It didn't take a lot of men and women to do what needed to be done. And with regard to Afghanistan, it's now I can say it because it was made public. I was totally against the whole notion of no nation building in Afghanistan. The only thing we should be doing is dealing with terrorism in that region. And the fact that I've been in every part of Afghanistan, not in combat like my friend has, but in a helicopter and or on a vehicle, in every part of it, as Senator and Vice President. Here's what I saw. There's no possibility of uniting that country, no possibility at all making it a whole country. But it is possible to see to it that you're not able to launch more attacks from the region on the United States of America. That's a small footprint that we needed. I argued for that in the beginning.
You mentioned Mayor Buttigieg, and I do want to take this to you next, Mayor. Given your finish in Iowa, you've come under increasing scrutiny, attacks from opponents on experience. We've heard that theme even right here tonight. You have said on the Iraq War, for example, I just don't believe there is any justification for that vote. You said it's the difference between tenure and judgment, that it's the judgment that matters, not the time in Washington. Vice President Biden, as you know, voted yes. As Commander-in-Chief, do you believe your judgment would be better than the Vice President's?
I believe that I have the judgment to help us get through these situations where obviously the Vice President made the wrong decision when it came to such an important moment in our foreign policy. And looking forward, we got to recognize just how much is going to be on the plate of the next president that is different in kind from what we have faced before. It's not just about dealing with the aftermath of the war in Iraq, it's about preventing a war with Iran. And not only do we have to undertake the military and counterterrorism activities that we've been doing throughout, the next president is going to have to restore the credibility of this country among our allies and among the international community. At a moment when we are facing fundamentally different challenges from asymmetric warfare to cybersecurity threats. President Trump's imagination of a national security strategy is a big wall and a moat full of alligators. It's a 17th century approach to keeping a place safe. What we have to do is be ready for the future. And that means insisting not only on shoring up our relationships, but defining a strategy to keep the American people safe from fundamentally new challenges.
Mr. Vice President, I'll let you respond to his argument on judgment.
I made a mistake. I said it 14 years ago. I trusted George Bush to keep his word. He said he was not going to go into Iraq. He said he was only using this to unite the United Nations, to insist we get inspectors in to see what Saddam was doing. When we got elected, the president turned to me with the entire security apparatus and said, Joe, I want you to organize getting 156,000 troops out of Iraq. I did that. I did that. The other thing I want to point out to you is that NATO is, in fact, going to crumble if we don't beat Trump. NATO is in real trouble. We need NATO for more reasons than just physical security. We need NATO to make sure that we do not allow Russia to continue to have its influence in Eastern Europe in ways that it had before. It wasn't just to stop the Soviet Union from coming into Europe. It was to make sure that we did not have a kleptocracy taking over that part of the world, to unite Europe in our behalf. I know how to deal with them. I know every one of these world leaders by their first names. They call me, I talk to them, and I believe I can get it done.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. Mr. Steyer, I do want to bring you in on this because I noticed in the last 24 hours you have an attack ad running here in New Hampshire with images of Mayor Buttigieg, and you say over those images an untested newcomer. But I wanted to ask you tonight on this readiness to be commander-in-chief. You share the stage with a veteran from Afghanistan, a vice president who was in the Situation Room. What makes you most qualified of all candidates on this stage to be commander-in-chief?
Well, let me say this. I agree with Pete Buttigieg that it's about judgment, not tenure. What we're hearing here is a very long dissertation about exactly how America should be the world's policeman. And what we've actually seen in the Middle East is that Barack Obama used diplomacy to get Iran to give up its nuclear ambitions in return for our releasing economic sanctions along with our partners around the world. So when we're talking about our role in the world and commander-in-chief, we have abandoned a diplomacy, we don't have a strategy, and we don't have allies. And actually, this view of the world, that our response should be military, is driven by our gigantic military complex and ignores the biggest problem that we face internationally in the world, which is climate change, and that cannot be solved with guns and tanks and planes. That can only be solved with diplomacy and allies and interaction with other countries. So in fact, what we are listening to right here is a discussion of 20 years of failed military action and how we should continue it and how we should continue spending $700 billion a year on defense when we spend $70 billion a year at the federal level on education. So let's talk about judgment here.
I did not say we're going to keep military forces there.
Mr. Vice President, I'll give you 30 seconds to respond.
That's not what I said. I was part of the reason putting that deal together with Iran. I was there. I was involved in that. I was also part of the deal putting together the Paris Climate Accord. I brought in the Chinese. I was part of that. I was part of every major initiative we've had relative to diplomacy. I have not argued for the placement of major numbers of U.S. combat troops. I have said, along with the President of the United States, Barack Obama, as his partner, I have said we have to strengthen NATO to make it clear that we keep our commitments when we make them. Like we don't keep our commitments to the Kurds, we must keep our commitments commitments when we make them. Otherwise, we have no power whatsoever. And it's not about making sure we're policemen of the world. The only way not to become the policemen of the world is to have allies who will join us in dealing with failed states and terrorism. And it has to be done jointly by a whole lot of people, and it doesn't require a large number of U.S. troops, and I've never said that.
Okay, can I respond
Senator
to that,
Sanders,
David?
Senator Sanders,
Can I
please.
respond to that?
Just
Because
say this, if I might. Like Joe and others, I also heard the arguments in terms of the war in Iraq from Bush, from Cheney, from John Bolton, from the whole administration. I listened very carefully, and I concluded that they were lying through their teeth. And I not only voted against that war, but I helped lead the opposition. And it saddens me so much, if you hear what I said, it's on YouTube, my fears about all the destabilization that would take place by the U.S. invading Iraq. It's sad to me that is what happened. But let me just pick up on a point that Tom made, which is absolutely right. Trump wants to build a wall around America. Problem is, if we are going to deal with issues like climate change, not only do we in America have to take on the greed of the fossil fuel industry, we have to lead the entire world. This is not an American issue. It's a global issue. We got to bring China and Russia and Brazil and Pakistan and India and every major country on earth into the fight against climate change. And here is my dream. Maybe it's a radical dream, but maybe, just maybe, given the crisis of climate change, the world can understand that instead of spending $1.8 trillion a year collectively on weapons of destruction designed to kill each other, maybe we pool our resources and fight our common enemy, which is climate change.
So, David,
Senator Sanders, thank you. George, back to you.
We have much more debate coming up, but we have got to take a break. We'll be right back.
And welcome back to Manchester, New Hampshire, and the ABC News Democratic debate. Thanks for joining us here on ABC News Live. I'm Devin Dwyer with our political correspondent, Rachel Scott. Rachel, we have some of the best seats in the House here tonight.
I would say so, right, Devin?
Good stuff.
Not
what
too
a
bad.
debate it has been so far. If you're just joining us or joined in the middle, we saw Bernie Sanders defend his attacks on Pete Buttigieg. We saw the former Vice President Joe Biden talk about his weak showing in Iowa, and both of them, Rachel, went on the attack on Pete Buttigieg.
I think one thing is clear here tonight, Devin. This is just not a fight to beat President Trump. This is a fight and a battle over the future of the Democratic Party. And we are seeing some very clear lanes being carved out here tonight. You see the moderates versus the progressives, and you also see the newcomers to Washington, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, versus those that have lots of political experience on that stage. And one of the things that comes with having the momentum in this race is having a target on your back. And we saw that tonight for Mayor Pete Buttigieg, getting attack after attack. He tried to fend them off as best as he could, saying he is the one that can bring a fresh face to Washington, that Washington needs it right now. But the candidates on that stage questioning his experience and whether or not a small town mayor can beat President Trump and lead the nation, Devin.
And hitting right back against Bernie Sanders in his, quote, my way or the highway approach to politics, in the words of Pete Buttigieg, also calling Joe Biden part of the politics of the past. It was also an interesting moment in this first part of the debate where impeachment made a roaring comeback. It has finished and wrapped up in Washington, but it was a lot of the discussion here on stage, including a standing ovation for those White House officials who were escorted off the job today in an act of retribution.
Yeah, you saw that standing ovation for Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, but also a moment of unity on the stage there. And this is something that all of the candidates agree on, right? Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who has just ramped up his attacks against the former vice president in this last stretch, came to his defense tonight on that stage, saying that we will not allow the Republicans to change the subject. He says that we need to draw a line against these attacks against Hunter Biden.
And 4 days to go before those big votes here in New Hampshire. Coming into this debate, we saw the storyline solidify today in some new polling that just came out. If you haven't seen those numbers, take a look here. We see Bernie Sanders on top of the pack, but Pete Buttigieg surging in the last 2 weeks here in New Hampshire, coming on Sanders' heels. This is just one poll from Marist and NBC News. Joe Biden slipping a bit there. Rachel, you have been out on the campaign trail talking to voters in this state, and they are still making up their minds.
They are still making up their minds. They just have a few days left to decide, and they're eager to hear what the candidates have to say tonight. But listen, this is a state that Senator Sanders won back in 2016. He's going to be looking for a repeat. Devin.
All right, and those candidates now coming back on stage for the second half here of the ABC News Democratic debate in New Hampshire. Stay with us here on ABC News Live for much more coverage ahead, and now we'll hand it back to George and the team.
St. Anselm College here in New Hampshire, and we are here every 4 years thanks to our amazing Manchester partner, WMUR. And now anchor Monica Hernandez and political director Adam Sexton are joining us with questions on the minds of New Hampshire voters.
Thank you, George. It's an honor to be here in our community. We know Granite Staters are engaged, and we know there are issues that strike especially close to home here. New Hampshire has one of the highest rates of deadly overdoses in the country. In some cases, police and paramedics tell us that they are saving the same lives again and again, sometimes more than once in a single day. It's a healthcare issue, but it's also so much more. Mayor Buttigieg, you have described yourself as a moderate, but one of your policies at least goes further than some on the stage with you are willing to go. You have called for the decriminalization of all drugs. Does that include heroin, meth, and cocaine, some of the drugs that have contributed to this crisis?
No, what I've called for is that incarceration should no longer be the response to drug possession.
With all due respect, Mayor Buttigieg, on your website, it says that you call for decriminalization of all drugs.
Again, what I'm calling for is that we end the use of incarceration as a response. This does not mean that it will be lawful to produce or distribute those kinds of harmful drugs. But also, as we know from the opioid crisis, some of this has been driven by companies that were acting irresponsibly with substances that were lawful. It's why in South Bend we sued those companies to hold them accountable. We've got to make sure that there is accountability for those who suppressed evidence about the addictiveness of those substances, even while we're also coming to recognize that these kinds of addiction are a medical issue, not a moral failure on the part of somebody battling that addiction. That's why medication-assisted treatment is so important. And those people who are being revived, and our own EMTs in my city have been so frustrated by the experience of reviving somebody, but then they have nowhere to go. Sometimes you get brought back with a dose of Narcan, but then your life depends on whether in the days that follow you make it until somebody can actually see you, because we have such a shortage of mental health and addiction providers in this country. We must act to change that and save lives when we do.
I want to bring this question now to Mr. Yang. You've said you would decriminalize opioids, but you've also said that you would require all overdose patients to go to mandatory treatment centers for 3 days. Well, right now in New Hampshire, there aren't enough beds in treatment centers and across the country. How would you make sure treatment is available for all overdose patients, and what would you do to fill the gap in the meantime?
That's what we have to change, Monica. I've heard heartbreaking stories from families here in New Hampshire that have been destroyed, torn apart by the opiate epidemic. And you have to look at the companies that profited to the tune of tens of billions of dollars in profits of essentially blood money. As president, we will take back those profits and put them to work right here in New Hampshire so that if you are seeking treatment, you have resources to be able to pursue it. This is not a money problem fundamentally, this is a human problem, but money cannot be the obstacle. This is something that happened on the government's watch. The government allowed this opiate epidemic to spread throughout our communities, and we have to do everything in our power to actually make sure that if you're seeking treatment, you know you're not going to be sent to jail. We have safe injection and safe consumption sites for you. If you have a family member who's struggling, you can refer them and know that they're not going to have criminal penalties as a result. There is so much about this that's endemic to what's happened throughout the country in terms of companies running amok, this hyper-corporate capitalism where if money's on one side in this country and people are on the other side, the money is winning. You can see it with the opiate epidemic. You can see it with the military-industrial complex, the fossil fuel companies. This is what we must change, and that's where I'll lead as president.
Senator Klobuchar, I want to take the question to you now. As a prosecutor, you embrace tough-on-crime policies, even with drug offenders. You've also spoken many times about your father's own addiction issues, his own alcoholism, and his DUI arrests. If addiction is a disease, should people be arrested for it? And as a prosecutor, do you regret sending people with substance abuse issues to jail?
I led one of the most successful drug courts in the country in Hennepin County. And I always would say and believed, and I think my record shows this, that we weren't a business. We didn't want to see repeat customers. And if you don't want to see repeat customers, the only answer is treatment. And maybe you're referring to some of the people who were dealing big time in drugs. Yes, I felt that we should prosecute those people. But when it comes to, and you asked Mr. Yang a question, and I think we owe it to the people of New Hampshire to have had one of the biggest addiction rates in the country and death rates when it comes to opioids, to explain how we will pay for the treatment and the beds. I've been very clear about this. There's going to be a major settlement coming through, a federal settlement against all these opioid manufacturers. The evidence is overwhelming, including an email where one guy, a business guy, says to the other, they're eating them like Doritos. Just keep pumping them out. We will get a conservative estimate, $40 billion in from that settlement. We can put a 2 cents per milligram tax on opioids that brings in another $40 billion. Then you can close the hedge fund loophole. That brings in $18 billion. And just like every other policy I've proposed, and I think New Hampshire voters should care about this, I have showed how I'm going going to pay for it, because I think we have someone in the White House that has told over 15,000 lies. He makes all kinds of promises. The people of New Hampshire and the people of our country deserve better. I will get this done, and it is personal for me.
Good evening, candidates. New Hampshire is a battleground not just for presidential contenders, but also for top issues, and that includes gun policy. Senator Sanders, for many voters in this Democratic primary, your allure is about consistency. When it comes to progressive issues, you've been on the right side of them for a long time. One exception is gun rights. In the 90s, when you were in Congress, you voted against background checks, and you also voted against a waiting period for purchase of a firearm. Can you explain why you oppose these things that you now support?
I can, Adam, and let me also say that in 1988, I probably lost a race for Congress, and we only have one congressperson in the whole state. Because in 1988, I said that we should ban the sale and distribution of assault weapons in this country. That was 30 years ago. Furthermore, I am very proud that today I have a D- voting record from the NRA. And under my administration, it will be the American people doing gun policy, not dictated by the NRA. But to answer your question, I come, like New Hampshire, from a very, very rural state. In Vermont, until last 2 years ago, we had virtually no gun control legislation at all, and I represented that perspective. The world has changed. In Vermont and in New Hampshire and all over this country, people are sickened by the mass shootings that we have seen and the gun violence that we have seen. The world has changed and my views have changed. And my view is right now, we need universal background checks. We end the gun show loophole. We end the so-called straw man provision. We make certain that we end the sale and distribution of assault weapons in this country. And we go further. We go further. But the bottom line is I will not be intimidated by the NRA. We're going to run the gun policy that the American people want.
Vice President Biden, you've taken a lot of heat in this primary on these debate stages and from voters here in New Hampshire for your past positions. You've essentially asked them to look at the totality of your record and give you the benefit of the doubt. Does Senator Sanders deserve that same benefit of the doubt on guns?
Well, look, here's the deal. The biggest mistake that Bernie made, that Senator Sanders made, he voted to give the gun manufacturers, the only major industry in America, a loophole that does not allow them to be sued for the carnage they are creating. First thing I'll do as president is work to get rid of that. It's going to be hard. Think of all the thousands and thousands of people who died. And I might add, Bernie, while you were representing your constituency, an awful lot of people, they're a gun state and they've come around. In fact, all those folks in California, New York, Pennsylvania, they were getting killed by the thousands during this same period. I come from a state that's a major gun-owning state. I introduced the first assault weapons ban. I, in fact, got it passed. I'm the only guy that beat the NRA twice. While I was pushing the Brady background background checks, Bernie voted 5 times against it when he was in the House. So look, the other thing is that when we have to be held accountable for the things we did. I'm the guy that set up drug courts. I set them up. I wrote it into law, and it never got funded. And also on opioids, I'm the guy who's already begun to make a down payment. In the Cures Act, I put in $1 billion to fight opioid addiction. And lastly, my time is going to be up shortly. Here's the deal. Those chief executive officers of those drug companies, they should not only be fined, they should go to jail.
Senator Warren, we'd like to go to you now.
Yeah.
Plans count for a lot. I want to ask you this question here, though. Laws can do so much. If you could change one thing about America's gun culture, what would it be?
Look, we have a gun violence problem in America. It is about the mass shootings that we hear about in our schools and that frighten us, about in theaters and in churches. It's also, though, about shootings that occur on sidewalks and in playgrounds, often in communities of color that are hit hardest. But there are no headlines over those. It's also about suicide and the increased lethality of suicide because of the availability of guns. It is also about the increased chances that it's usually a woman will die of domestic violence if she is with a violent man and a gun is in the home. We need need to think of this problem not as one and done or three things and done. We need to think of it just like we did on auto safety. We just keep coming back. We treat it like the public health emergency that it is. But the question we should be asking ourselves is, when America across this country, including gun owners, agree in certain basic things, universal background checks, get assault weapons off the streets, why can we not even get a vote in the United States Senate? And the answer is 90%. Think about this. More than 90% of Americans agree on this. We can't get a vote in the United States Senate because it is the gun industry that continues to call the shots. Until we attack the corruption in Washington, the influence of money on campaigns and lobbying, we're not going to be able to meet our promises. And one more, until we agree that we are willing to roll back the filibuster, the gun industry is going to continue to have a veto, and we will never make the changes we make. We have to be willing to build a future that works not for a gun industry, but that works for the rest of America and protects our children.
You've got to be able to sue the gun industry.
Thank you, candidates. We're going to go back to David up there at the Home Office.
Adam, Monica, thank you, and thanks to WMUR tonight. I want to turn to the Supreme Court, the balance on the court, and the issues before the court right now. President Trump, in just the last 24 hours, saying we've appointed 191 federal judges, 2 Supreme Court justices, keeping his campaign promise to shift the court to the right with Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. The Affordable Care Act is at the court, climate change is working its way to the court, and a major abortion case is on the docket this year. Vice President Biden, on the issue of abortion, in 2012, you said President Obama's 2 Supreme Court picks, of them, there was no litmus test. We picked people who had an open mind, did not come with an agenda. And you've said before, we both believe that we should not apply narrow litmus tests to appointees to the Supreme Court.
But I also
let me just ask, would you do it differently as president, Mr. Vice President? Would there be a litmus test on abortion?
If you say the rest of what I said that we're going to not appoint anyone who did not have a view that unenumerated rights existed in the Constitution. That's not a specific test. It's a generic test. And the only reason women have the right to choose is because it's determined that there's unenumerated rights coming from the 9th Amendment in the Constitution. That's what I said. And I was part of the reason why Elena Kagan, who worked for me, got on the Supreme Court. I was part of the reason why Ruth Bader Ginsburg is on the court. I was part of the reason why Sotomayor is on the court, and she swore me in. I presided, and I'm the reason why this right wasn't taken away a long time ago, because I almost single-handedly made sure that Robert Bork did not get on the court because he did not think there should be enumerated rights, unenumerated.
So let me just drill down.
Let's get that straight.
Mr. Vice President, I am aware of what you said, which is why I'm asking, would you do it differently now? Would there be a litmus test on abortion?
Yes, look, here's the deal. The litmus test on abortion relates to the fundamental value in the Constitution. A woman does have a right to choose. I would, in fact, if they rule it to be unconstitutional, I will send to the United States Congress, and it will pass, I believe, a bill that legislates Roe v. Wade adjusted by Casey. It's a woman's right to do that, period. And if you call that a litmus test, it's a litmus test. But what I was talking about in the past, so no one gets confused here, is if you read the Constitution very, very narrowly and say there are no unenumerated rights, if it doesn't say it in the Constitution, it doesn't exist. You cannot have any of the things I care about. Any of the things I care about as a progressive member of the United States Congress at the time, and as Vice President, and as a member of society.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. Senator Warren?
Look, I've lived in an America in which abortion was illegal, and rich women still got abortions. And that's what we have to remember about this. States are heading toward trying to ban abortion outright, and the Supreme Court seems headed in exactly that direction as well. If we are going to protect the people of the United States of America, and we are going to protect our rights to have dominion over our own bodies, then it's going to mean we can't simply rely on the courts. 3 out of every 4 people in America believe right now that the rule of Roe versus Wade should be the law. That means we should be pushing for a congressional solution as well. It is time to have a national law to protect the right of a woman's choice.
Senator Warren, thank you. Senator Klobuchar, I do want to come to you. Should there be a litmus test? It's an active hall here tonight. I did want to come to you on this question as well.
Thank you.
Should there be a litmus test on abortion?
I would only appoint judges that would respect precedent, and one of those key precedents is Roe v. Wade. In addition, you have got to put it into law. Donald Trump, and I think it's really important to take it to him here, when he was running for election, and this is a case I will make on the debate stage against him, he actually said that he wanted to put women in jail. He then dialed it back and said, no, I want to put doctors in jail. Is it a big surprise then we're seeing states like Alabama start enacting laws that would criminalize doctors who perform abortions? It's not. And that is why it's going to be really important when you look at the overwhelming public support for funding Planned Parenthood, for making sure women have access to contraceptions, to making sure that they have a right to choose, that we make this case strongly and loudly.
Senator Klobuchar, thank you. Mayor Buttigieg, you have signaled that you'd be open to the idea of expanding the court. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg had suggested leaving the court as it is, saying, quote, 9 seems to be a good number. And in fact, she said if the number of justices is increased, quote, it would make the court appear partisan. It would be one side saying, when we're in power, we're going to enlarge the number of judges to have more people who will vote the way we want them to. Is Justice Ginsburg wrong?
Well, if all we did was change the number of justices, then I agree with her that that could be the consequence. What I've called for is not only reforming the number of justices on the bench, but structural reform so that some of the justices are not appointed through a partisan process. We cannot allow the Supreme Court to continue to become one more political battlefield as we are seeing today. And the time has come for us to think bigger, not just reforming the makeup of the court, as America, by the way, has done several times in our history, but also remember that the founders gave us the power to amend the Constitution for a reason, and we shouldn't be afraid to use it. It's not something you do lightly or quickly, but when it comes to something like Citizens United, which holds that corporations have the same political soul as people, and that spending money to influence an election is the same thing as writing an op-ed to your local paper, we need a constitutional amendment to clear that up and protect our democracy.
Mayor Buttigieg, thank you. Vice President Biden, I do want to come to you on this. President Trump has said that the only reason Democrats want to expand the court is they want to try and catch up. You have called any expansion of the court a bad idea, adding, we will live to rue that day. Do you agree with President Trump on that?
I agree with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That's who I agree with. And I agree the way to deal with Citizens United is pass a constitutional amendment I introduced 25 years ago, saying that only public money can be spent in elections, period. Not private money, not billionaires, not money from special interests, period. That's the way to amend the Constitution and deal with that. In addition to that, if in fact, look, the Democrats stood up against a man I revere, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He wanted to expand the court, but they were wise enough to understand that whoever then is the majority will have the ability to abuse it, and it will lose its legitimacy. And there are 3 equal branches of government. It says the president shall nominate, the Senate shall dispose. The Senate shall make that decision, not the president. He can nominate. That's why it's so important. We must win back the United States Senate this time out. And that's why, as you all look at it up here in New Hampshire and around the world, around the country, you have to ask yourself, who is most likely to help get a senator elected in North Carolina, Georgia? Who can win Florida, Pennsylvania, Minnesota? Who can do that? Because you got to be able to win those. Well, you can. I agree. But here's the point. You've got to be able to. You've got to be able to not just win, you've got to bring along a United States Senate, or this becomes moot.
Okay.
Senator Sanders.
Thank you. Look, you asked a simple question. Is there a litmus test for those of us up here? For me, there is. I will never nominate any person to the Supreme Court or the federal courts in general who is not 100% pro Roe v. Wade. Number 2, we have got to codify Roe v. Wade into legislation. Number 3, we have to significantly expand funding for Planned Parenthood.
Mr. Steyer, I want to bring you in on this because you have claimed that when it comes to the Supreme Court, you have said Republicans have been cheating.
Sure, they've been cheating. Look, what we saw Mitch McConnell do, not just in the Supreme Court with Merrick Garland, but across the board with federal judges, was refuse to allow President Obama's picks to be considered. That's why Mr. Trump has appointed so many federal judges, because in fact, the Republicans refuse to allow President Obama to get his due. And honestly, we're sitting here talking about, do you have a litmus test? We all have the litmus test. Everybody on this row feels exactly the same way about a woman's right to choose. Everybody on this row feels exactly the same way on gun control. Every single one in this row feels the same way. There's something else going on. These Republicans are in control. They're stacking the court for a generation with young right-wing radicals, and we've watched it happen, and the question is, what are we going to do about it? That's where we are in the United States. And the question is, actually, Joe Biden's right. We have to go win a huge victory this year, and we're in trouble. And so the question is going to be, look at these people. Who can pull together the Democratic Party? And let me say this. We have not said one word tonight about race. Not one word. Are you kidding me? We have the most diverse party. We have a very diverse country. We have a very diverse party. The heart and soul of this party is diversity: black people, Latinos, AAPI people, Native Americans, and white people. But for goodness sakes, pull it together. We're talking about something different. The question we have is, how are we getting that diverse group of people to the polls? What are we saying? Everybody on this stage feels the same way about a woman's right to choose and economic justice. The question is, how do we beat Trump? How do we take down these Republicans? And the answer is, we've got to show we can take them down on growth, job creation, the economy. We send them packing, and then we get all of this, including beating the corporation.
Mr. Steyer, thank you. The night is still young. Many questions to come, and Lindsay Davis is next.
I want to turn now to criminal justice. Mayor Buttigieg, under your leadership as mayor, a black resident in South Bend, Indiana, was 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than a white resident. Now, that racial disparity is higher than the rest of the state. In fact, it's higher than the rest of the nation, and that disparity increased in South Bend after you took office. When talking about the problem on national terms, you've called it, quote, evidence of systemic racism. But you were mayor for 8 years, so weren't you, in effect, the head of the system? And how do you explain that increase in black arrests under your leadership?
Well, the reality is, on my watch, drug arrests in South Bend were lower than the national average, and specifically to marijuana, lower than in Indiana. But there is no question that systemic racism has penetrated to every level of our system, and my city was not immune. I took a lot of heat for discussing systemic racism with my own police department, but we've got to confront the fact that there is no escaping how this is part of all of our policies. Earlier, we were talking about opioids, and thankfully, America has come to a better understanding about the fact that opioid addiction is best understood as a medical problem. But there were a lot of people, including a lot of African-American activists in my community, who have made the very good point. It's great that everybody's so enlightened about drug policy now when it comes to opioids, but where were you when it came to marijuana? Where were you when it came to the crack epidemic in the 1990s? That is one of the reasons why I am calling for us as a country to take up those reforms that end incarceration as a response to possession, and make sure that we legalize marijuana, and when we do it retroactively with expungements to correct the harm done in so many cases of incarceration, disproportionately of black and brown Americans, where the incarceration did far more harm than the offense it was intended to deal with. I want to go back to the original question, though. How do you explain the increase in black arrests in South Bend under your leadership for marijuana possession? And again, the overall rate was lower. No, there was an increase. The year before you were in office, it was lower. Once you became in office in 2012, that number went up. In 2018, the last year that we have a record for, that number was still up. Yeah. And one of the strategies that our community adopted was to target when there were cases where there was gun violence and gang violence, which was slaughtering so many in our community. Burying teenagers, disproportionately black teenagers. We adopted a strategy that said that drug enforcement would be targeted in cases where there was a connection to the most violent group or gang connected to a murder. These things are all connected, but that's the point. So are all of the things that need to change in order for us to prevent violence and remove the effects of systemic racism, not just from criminal justice, but from our economy, from health, from housing, and from our democracy itself.
Senator Warren, is that a substantial answer from Mayor Buttigieg?
No. You have to own up to the facts. And it's important to own up to the facts about how race has totally permeated our criminal justice system. You know, for the exact same crime, study after study now shows that African Americans are more likely than whites to be detained, to be arrested, to be taken to trial, to be wrongfully convicted, and to receive harsher sentences. We need to rework our criminal justice system from the very front end on what we make illegal all the way through the system and how we help people come back into the community. But we cannot just say that criminal justice is the only time we want to talk about race specifically. We need to start having race-conscious laws. Housing, for example. I have a great housing plan to build more housing in America, but understand it was the policy of the United States of America to discriminate against African Americans and people, any other people of color, for buying homes until 1965. You can't just repeal that and say, okay, now everything is even. It's not. We need race-conscious laws in education, in employment, in entrepreneurship, to make this country a country of opportunity for everyone, no matter the color of their skin.
Elizabeth, with respect, with respect, you can't regulate away racism with a whole patchwork of laws that are race-specific. What we have to do is heed the writings of Martin Luther King, whose birthday we just celebrated. He said that capitalism forgets that life is social, and what he was championing was a guaranteed minimum income for all Americans of $1,000 a month or more that would end up reshaping our economy in communities of color, make it so that black net worth is not 10% of white net worth in this country, which is the most important number of them all. We can't regulate that away through any other means except by putting money directly into the hands of African Americans and Latinos and people of color to allow businesses to actually flourish and grow in those communities. The only way that will happen is if Black and Latino consumers have buying power, and that is where we have to move as a country.
Senator Sanders, then Mr. Steyer.
Andrew, no, let me say this. I disagree with you, Andrew. I am the person on this stage who will say openly, I'm for reparations. Something wrong happened. I am for reparations to African Americans in this country, and anyone who thinks that racism is a thing of the past and not an ongoing problem is not dealing with reality. In fact, 3 days ago, one of the leaders of Joe Biden's South Carolina campaign made racist remarks about someone associated with our campaign. And the Legislative Black Caucus went out en masse to stand up for that man and for our campaign. Joe, I'm asking you to come with me and the Legislative Black Caucus and disavow Dick Harpootlian and what he had to say. It was wrong. And I'm asking you to join us, be on the right side.
I'm asking you to join me and join in the support I have from the overwhelming number of the members of that Black Caucus. I have more support in South Carolina in the Black Caucus and the Black community than anybody else. Double what you have or anybody else has.
But wait a second, Bernie.
Well, that is quite right.
Let's not argue about polls.
This isn't about
Bernie. This isn't about polls.
I'm not
this is not about polls.
I'm not talking about polls.
We have 9 members of the Black Caucus in South Carolina supporting us. But more importantly, much of what Elizabeth said is absolutely correct. We have a racist society from top to bottom, impacting healthcare, housing, criminal justice, education, you name it. And clearly this is an issue that must be dealt with. But in terms of criminal justice, what we have got to do is understand the system is broken, is racist. We invest in our young people in jobs and education, not more jails and incarceration. We end the war on drugs, which has disproportionately impacted African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans. We end private prisons and detention centers in America.
Bernie, I appreciate what you're saying.
And, excuse me, we also, most people don't know this, tonight in America, 200,000 people are in jail without having been convicted of anything.
That's right.
200,000 people because they can't afford the $500 for bail they need to get out of jail. That is outrageous. We're going to end cash bail.
Okay, let me say this. I've worked to end cash bail in California, and it's gone. I've worked to end private prisons in California, and they're gone. I'm somebody our family, my wife and I, started a bank specifically to support businesses owned by women, black people, and Latinos because they couldn't get financing anywhere else. But Joe, I want to answer. Really, I think you should come over and disavow the statements that this man made that were openly racist, that were wrong, and the Legislative Black Caucus is against. I'm asking you to join us and do the right thing.
I've already spoken to Dick Harpootlian, and he, in fact, is, I believe, sorry for what he said. But here's the deal, folks. Look, we got to stop taking the black community for granted. That's the starting place. Every one of the things we talked about here, for example, in South Carolina, Jim Clyburn, he has a program, 10, 15, 30. We should be investing our money in those communities that haven't gotten help for a long time and give most of that help to those communities. Make it a priority. We should make sure that we have no one going to jail for a drug offense. They go directly mandatory mandatory treatment, not prison. And we fund it. And we fund it, and 3 days doesn't get it. It takes at least 60 to 90 days to make any progress. We have to pay for that, just like instead of building new prisons, we build new rehabilitation centers. We have to make sure that we have a window at the Treasury Department that allows entrepreneurs who are black and brown and minorities to be able to get loans to be able to start businesses. You know, if you own a house, I know you do know, if you own a house in an all-black neighborhood, same exact house in an all-white neighborhood, exact same shape, the house valued in the black neighborhood would be valued as worth less, making it difficult for you to accumulate wealth, as my friend at the end of the line here says. So here's the deal. We have to do much, much more. That's what got me involved in politics in the first place, redlining, to stop it. I got involved through the civil rights movement. I became a public defender. That's why I got involved. There's so many things we have to do across the board, and in education. At-risk schools. We should triple the funding we have for at-risk schools to provide for 4, 5, and 6 years old to be able to go, 3, 4, and 5 years old to go to school, not daycare. Increase the salaries of teachers. Encourage more blacks to get into teaching, especially black men, because the studies show when there's a black man in a community, in a school, it increases prospects significantly, and so on. There's a lot we can do. I've laid it all out as how to do it. Go to joebiden.com. You'll see the whole deal, including criminal justice reform.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. As you mentioned, South Carolina, 3 weeks from tomorrow, they'll go to the polls to vote. Black voters make up about 60% of the electorate there. Senator Sanders, several weeks ago, Nina Turner, one of your national co-chairs, published an op-ed piece that said Vice President Biden has, quote, repeatedly betrayed black voters to side with Republican lawmakers and undermine our progress. Senator Sanders, do you agree with her? One of your most visible surrogates, that Vice President Biden has repeatedly betrayed black voters?
Well, I think what Senator Turner was talking about are some of the early actions of Vice President Biden. But no, Joe Biden is a friend of mine, and I'm not here to attack him. But what I would say is that what we need in terms of the African-American community is to understand that we have got to start investing big time in education, in healthcare. There is no excuse why white families in America have 10 times more wealth than black families. No excuse that disproportionately African Americans are in jail compared to whites. No excuse for black women dying in childbirth 3 times the rate that white women are doing as well.
Senator Klobuchar. You had raised your hand before.
Yes, I did, because I think in addition to the economic argument we're making here with the sad stories of a woman walking into a maternity room in New Orleans and saying her hands are swollen and walking out without her baby, and 30% of African American kids living in poverty. We know that there are economic solutions here to invest in those communities, housing, childcare, but there's something else insidious going on that we haven't addressed, and that is the systematic racism when it comes to voting. That is moves across the country to limit people's right to vote. And that is why I have been leading on these bills to automatically register every kid to vote in this country when they turn 18. There is no reason that we can't do that across this country. To stop the gerrymandering by setting up independent commissions in every single state. And yes, to stop the voting purges. Because what is going on right now, in the words of one North Carolina court, is that they are discriminating with surgical precision against African American voters. And we are not going to be able to get any of these things done if we don't give people the right to vote.
Vice President Biden and then Senator Warren.
I beg your pardon?
I just wanted to give you a chance to respond.
Yes, I agree completely. There should be registration, automatic registration turning 18. You get a driver's license, whatever you do, you automatically are registered, number one. Number two, with regard to what we're going to see in South Carolina, we're all going to be there pretty soon. We'll see whether or not it works. The response to the letter that the person, I'm not saying Bernie wrote the letter, but the senator wrote the letter, was very brisk and significant with other African Americans in South Carolina taking issue with her. But look, Amy is right. The senator is correct. That is that we, in fact, there is systematic racism. And that's why our Justice Department works so hard to go after those. You know, realize there are 35 states in the United States of America that have come up with a total of 78 laws to restrict voting just in the last 5 years to try to keep African Americans from voting, and brown as well, black and brown people from voting. And that will be an enormous priority in my administration, as it was in ours. It's just wrong, simply wrong.
Senator Warren.
You know, I'm glad to stand on this stage with my fellow Democrats who talk about how important the black community is, at least at election time. Year after year after year, election after election after election, Democrats go to people in the black community and say, boy, we really care about these issues. Racism is terrible. We all want to do something. And then somehow the problem just seems to keep getting worse. Well, I think it's time we have real concrete plans that are going to make a difference in people's lives. I proposed a 2-cent wealth tax. And let me tell you just one of the things we can do with a 2-cent wealth tax. We can cancel student loan debt for 43 million Americans. And because African Americans have to borrow more money to go to college, borrow more money while they're in college and have a harder time paying it back when they get out, that one law is going to help close the black-white wealth gap for people with student loans by about 20 points. We aren't making a difference in America. We're saying to the rich folks, you keep your money, and the rest of us will talk about racism, but not really do anything. I think the time for that is over. I'm ready to get in this fight and really make a change.
George.
Okay, thank you. Actually, let's keep this debate going. Go ahead, Mr. Steyer.
Look, out of narrative comes policy. And we're talking about a lot of policies that affect Americans broadly and disproportionately affect black Americans or brown Americans. But what I believe is we should set up a commission on race and deal with race explicitly. Because everyone's saying we can't have rules that are different for different people, but in fact we're here because we had rules that are different for different people. I would set up a formal commission on race on day one to retell the story of the last 400 years in America of systematic racism against African Americans, not just legal discrimination, injustice, and cruelty, but also the contribution that the African American community has made to America in building it and in leading the entire country from a moral standpoint for generations and centuries. Because I believe out of narrative comes policy. We need to repair damage that's been done officially, and pretending we're all the same is not accurate. We got here a certain way. Let's talk about Jim Crow. Let's talk about Martin Luther King. Let's talk about Barbara Lee, the congresswoman from Oakland, who's one of our great leaders, and then let's figure out how to repair the damage so we can move forward together.
Mr. Yang, take on that argument and also what he said about reparations.
The median African-American household net worth is projected to be 0 by 2053. Things are not getting better for people of color. If anything, they're getting worse because we're in the process of eliminating the most common jobs in our economy. It's something of an economic unnatural disaster. And who suffers most in a natural disaster? People of color, people with lower levels of capital and access to opportunity and education. And while I know we love to champion education here as Democrats, only 33% of Americans are going to attend college. Lower percentage of African Americans. There is no way we can prevent this tsunami from wiping out African American net worth unless we put straight cash into their hands sometime between now and 2053. And it's not just them. It is truck drivers, it is retail clerks, it is call center workers, it is accountants, it is bookkeepers. We are in the midst of the greatest economic transformation in the history of our country, and it's going to hit black people the hardest. We have to stop nibbling at the edges and actually start solving the real problem.
We've been getting a lot of questions. We've been getting a lot of questions from Apple News and tonight, including many about a candidate who's not on the stage tonight, but it is in this race, and that is former Mayor Michael Bloomberg of New York. And this question came in from Nashville, Tennessee. It says, billionaire Michael Bloomberg has entered the race and just got the endorsement of a former Trump Navy secretary. Why do you think you are better positioned than Bloomberg to beat Trump? Senator Warren.
Look, I don't think anyone ought to be able to buy their way into a nomination or to be president of the United States. I don't think any billionaire ought to be able to do it, and I don't think people who suck up to billionaires in order to fund their campaigns ought to do it. I heard everyone here talking about, as Democrats, we all want to overturn Citizens United because we want to end this unlimited spending. Yeah, except everyone on this stage, except Amy and me, is either a billionaire or is receiving help from PACs that can do unlimited spending. So if you really want to live where you say, then put your money where your mouth is and say no to the PACs. Look, I think the way we build a democracy going forward is not billionaires reaching in their own pockets or people sucking up to billionaires. The way we build it going forward is we have a grassroots movement funded from the grassroots up. That's the way I'm running this campaign. If you think it's the right way to run a campaign, go to ElizabethWarren.com and pitch in $5, because understand this. Our democracy hangs in the balance. If we have to fund through billionaires, then we're just going to be an America that's going to work better and better for billionaires and not for anyone else.
So I can't stand the big money in politics. And one of my major focuses is going to be on passing that constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. I didn't come from money. And I just simply think people don't look at the guy in the White House and say, can we get someone richer? I don't think they think that. They want to have someone that they can understand. And you know my background. My grandpa was an iron ore miner. He worked 1,500 feet underground in the mines his whole life. He couldn't even graduate from high school because he had to raise his 9 brothers and sisters. My grandpa saved money in a coffee can to send my dad to a 2-year community college. That was my family's trust. And you can't send, like Donald Trump got from his family, you can't fit $413 million in a coffee can. My mom grew up as and wanted to be a teacher in Wisconsin. She moved to Minnesota. She taught 2nd grade until she was 70 years old. And no, I am not a billionaire, but I stand before you today as the granddaughter of an iron ore miner, the daughter of a teacher and a newspaperman, the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from the state of Minnesota, someone who has passed over 100 bills as the lead Democrat in that gridlock in Washington, D.C. And that is because we live in a country of shared dreams. And that means no matter where you come from, no matter where you come from, you should be able to make it. So please help me in my efforts at amyklobuchar.com.
Everybody's getting the fundraising pitches out here right now. Senator Sanders, I am coming to you, but Mayor Bloomberg is. Let me just put the question to you, because Mayor Bloomberg has taken on your argument.
I got an answer before the question. It's more.
He says we need evolution, not revolution.
Can you hear that?
Mayor Bloomberg has said we need evolution, not revolution, taking you on directly.
Well, you know, it's a funny thing. There are millions of people who can desire to run for office. But I guess if you're worth $60 billion and you could spend several $100 million on commercials, you have a slight advantage. That is nonsense. What we have got to do is have a nation in which we not only overturn Citizens United, we move to public funding of elections. In terms of money in politics, all right? Our campaign, and I am enormously proud of this, unlike some of the folks up here, I don't have 40 billionaires, Pete, contributing to my campaign, coming from the pharmaceutical industry, coming from Wall Street and all the big money interests. What we do have is we have now over 6 million contributions from 1.5 million people, averaging $18.50 a contribution. That is unprecedented in the history of American politics. If we want to change America, you're not going to do it by electing candidates who are going out to rich people's homes begging for money. The way we're going to do it is build a mass movement of working people who are prepared to stand up, not take money from these billionaires, not take money from Wall Street, but stand up to the drug companies in Wall Street. And if you want to be part of that political revolution, BernieSanders.com.
Mayor Buttigieg, close this round out.
We are going into the fight of our lives. Donald Trump, according to news reports, and his allies raised $25 million today. We need to go into that fight with everything that we've got. Now, I've been very clear on both my record, where I have sued pharmaceutical companies, and what I'm campaigning for, that includes raising wages and raising taxes on corporations and the wealthy. And as the only person on this stage who is not a millionaire or a billionaire, I know a thing or two about building a movement, because mayor of South Bend, Indiana is not exactly an establishment fundraising powerhouse. We are here without the involvement of any corporate PACs, because hundreds of thousands of people went to, yes, PeteForAmerica.com, contributed to this campaign. And let me say something else. If we want to bring about any of the changes that everyone is talking about so elegantly up here, we need to put together the majority that can decisively defeat Donald Trump. And in order to do that, we need a politics that is defined not by who we reject, but how we bring everybody into the fold. And if you are low income, or if you're able to contribute a lot, if you've always voted Democrat, or if you're an independent or even a Republican who's just sick of looking your kids in the eye and trying to explain this White House, we need you to join us right now. I will not pursue politics by telling people they can't be at our side if they're not with us 100% of the time. This is a time for addition, not rejection, for belonging, not exclusion.
Mayor Buttigieg, thank you. I want to turn to climate change and jobs here in America. President Trump just signed the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. Many call it an updated NAFTA. But it does include incentives to make cars here in North America, and it does open Canadian markets for American dairy farmers. Senator Sanders, as we sit here in New Hampshire tonight, both New Hampshire Senators Maggie Hassan and Senator Jeanne Shaheen supported this. They voted yes, calling it a real win for workers and for farmers. You voted no because you said you believe it takes us back years on climate. Were the senators from New Hampshire wrong?
Yes. I mean, it's a disagreement, but if you look at every environmental group in this country, including the Sunrise Organization, we're so proud to have their support because we have introduced the most comprehensive climate change proposal I think ever offered by a presidential candidate. What they are saying, what the environmental groups are saying, we're simply exporting fossil fuel emissions to Mexico. There is not one word in that trade agreement that deals with climate change. And I don't know how in 2020 you can do that. Second of all, there is, in terms of outsourcing of jobs, a major crisis in this country. Nobody believes that under this Trump trade agreement that there will not be continued and significant outsourcing of jobs into low-wage Mexico, where workers are paid, in some cases, less than $2 an hour. So I think the right vote was to vote against that agreement. I don't apologize for that.
Senator Sanders, thank you. I do want to go to Senator Klobuchar. You heard what Senator Sanders just said there. He said not one word on climate in the trade deal. So why did you vote yes?
Well, first of all, I want to defend the honor of the incredible two senators from New Hampshire, Jeanne Shaheen and Maggie Hassan, who work so hard for this state every day, and I voted with them. Why did I vote with them? Because there were some major improvements in this trade agreement when it comes to labor inspections, when it comes to getting rid of a sweetheart pharma deal that was in place. And when it comes to climate change, I think we have to have a North American trading bloc. We have to have Mexico and Canada and America working together. And the best way to take on climate change, as president, yes, I'll work to make this a part of every future trade agreement, but the best way to take on climate change is by getting back into the International Climate Change Agreement, which I will do on day one. It is bringing back the clean power rules, it is bringing back the gas mileage standards, and it is introducing sweeping legislation to put a price on carbon. And you cannot divorce trade from that, and in future trade agreements, that should be part of our negotiations. But I'm telling you right now, having no trade agreement with Canada and Mexico puts us at such a disadvantage when it comes to dealing with China and pushing China to do better when it comes to climate change.
Senator Klobuchar, thank you. Senator Warren, you voted yes as well.
Yes, I did, and I'll tell you why. Because there are a lot of farmers around this country that are really hurting because of Donald Trump's trade policies. There are a lot of workers who are hurting because they can't get enforcement of any workers' rights. So this NAFTA provision, after a lot of negotiation with Democrats, Senator Sherrod Brown helped make it a whole lot better. This makes things somewhat better for workers and for farmers. And when I see a law that makes things somewhat better for hardworking people in this country, I say I'll sign up for that, and then I'll get up tomorrow morning and I'll start working hard for a better trade deal on climate, a better trade deal that has a basic coherence to it. Everyone wants to get to the American market. We should be raising standards on climate around the world to get access to our market.
Mr. Steyer.
Yeah, I mean, I got to agree with Bernie Sanders. And I got to, Senator, I do. Senator Warren is right. Everybody wants to get into our market. And that's how we convince them that they've got to be right on climate too. That we have to stop making foreign policy decisions in the old way. Yeah, of course we want to make things better for American workers. And it's absolutely critical that when we think about trade policy, we're thinking about it from the point of view of the American people, not of the American corporations. That's a huge positive change, and I agree with the senators on that. But there's something else going on here when we think about our foreign policy, and that's this. We talked about whether it was right to kill General Soleimani. And there was no discussion in that about where that leaves the United States in the community of nations around the world. So if we actually want to be the leaders of the world, the leaders of the free world, who can actually negotiate a climate treaty around the world that sticks, that makes a difference, we're going to have to put climate first. And when we think about doing the wrong thing the way Mr. Trump did with General Soleimani, we have to ask, does that help us build a coalition of countries around the world to do the right thing? It absolutely does not. Being all by ourselves, being the empire in the Star Wars movie, does not put us in a position to get done what we need to get done as the leader of the free world. And so, in fact, the USMCA is something that's the first step, but the second step is exactly what Bernie Sanders is saying. Use access to our market as a negotiating thing to make sure not only that we represent American workers, but that we represent the American people in the long run, and we make sure that we get a safe
Tom,
climate deal.
One of the things about being in the arena is you have to make decisions all the time.
Yes.
And these things aren't always exactly how you would do them. But in this case, if you want to criticize Trump for not ever having any friends, and I would agree, he always sides with tyrants over innocents. He always sides with dictators over allies. But I think you've got to have some friends. And those two countries, our neighbors, may not be perfect, but they are our friends. And we have a president that literally blames everyone in the world, and we have not talked about this enough. He blames Barack Obama for everything that goes wrong. He blames his Federal Reserve chair that he appointed himself. He blames the King of Denmark. Who does that? He blames the Prime Minister of Canada for, he claims, cutting him out of the Canadian version of Home Alone 2. Who does that? That's what Donald Trump does. So my point here is that when we have opportunities to work with our allies, and New Hampshire is such a great example of this. New Hampshire, Bretton Woods, New Hampshire with senators like Jeanne Shaheen and Maggie Hassan, who believe we need to work with NATO and the rest of the world, who sees it as a smaller state, but a state that is a piece of the world. We cannot be alone. And that trade agreement was not perfect. But the point of it is, if we start isolating ourselves from the rest of the world, we are going to hurt ourselves economically, and we are going to hurt our nation's security.
All right, Senator Klobuchar, thanks very much.
We have hit the 2-hour mark. We're going to take a quick break and come back with a final question.
And welcome back to Manchester, New Hampshire and the ABC News Democratic debate. Thanks for joining us here on ABC News Live tonight. I'm Devin Dwyer, joined with our political correspondent, Rachel Scott. Rachel, we heard so much this last block about gun policy, abortion, climate change, and then the issue of race, pushed on by Tom Steyer, and really a lot of the candidates confronting Joe Biden, a sign of where this campaign is headed.
Exactly, Devin. Steyer tonight calling out the lack of discussion when it comes to race on that that stage. The conversation turning 90 minutes into this debate, and Biden touting what the national polls reflect, his loyalty among African-American voters. I have sat down with the vice president. He has told me it's one of the things that he is most proud of, his loyalty among black supporters. And if you want to just see how important black voters are to the Democratic base, all you have to look at are the numbers from 2016. The exit polls from that primary, 6 out of 10 voters in Mississippi were black. 61% of voters in the South Carolina primary were black. And that's where the candidates are going to be heading very soon ahead of that.
And to Nevada as well, with a lot of voters of color there. And Joe Biden holding a lion's share of those voters. We'll see if these candidates can chip away. You know, we were talking so many of the policies we heard about tonight, like so many of the previous debates, are familiar positions from these candidates, which is why the style of their performance tonight is going to get a lot of attention from voters.
It will. But, you know, when I talk to voters as I travel the country, they tell me their number one concern is electability. They want someone that could beat President Trump. They want someone that could carry this over the finish line. And that's why you hear so much of the discussion pivoting back to who can do that on that stage today.
And I was up in Derry, New Hampshire just yesterday hearing not only a lot of attention on those qualities of style, but also a lot of anxiety over this issue of electability, particularly now with Donald Trump's polling numbers on the rise, his performance at the State of the Union, and his acquittal in that Senate trial. It's going to be a 4-day sprint. I know you're going to be out there all weekend, as I will as well. And we were just talking about what this moment in this campaign will mean. We could see a dramatically smaller field after Tuesday night here in New Hampshire.
Yeah. Tom Perez came out here and he said, listen, we are beginning a 90-day sprint. Most of the delegates are going to be grabbed up by the end of this 90 days, and the candidates really have to hone in on their pitch here. The voting has started already. We're moving into the New Hampshire primary, and a lot of these candidates have a lot on the line here. They only have a few days left to gain momentum before that next vote is cast. And again, this race is getting tighter and tighter.
And we know Donald Trump will be here in New Hampshire and Manchester as well on Monday, so things are going to get a little even more exciting here as 4 days ahead of the New Hampshire primaries. We head back now for the final question in this ABC News Democratic debate. Take a look at the speaking times of the candidates. We'll leave you with that. Joe Biden, top of the list. All the candidates back at their podiums. Stay with us right here on ABC News Live.
From Manchester, the Democratic debate. Here now, George Stephanopoulos.
Welcome back to our debate. Time now for a final question. Each of you will answer it in turn. We'll start with Mr. Yang. And the question is this. According to the Children's Defense Fund, it's been more than 20 years since child poverty was directly addressed in a presidential debate. The year was 1999. The questioner was our friend and former who may be watching right now, the late Cokie Roberts. Cokie loved the New Hampshire primary, and she asked the candidates in this Republican debate, how will we overcome the scandal of 1/4 of American preschoolers living in poverty in the richest nation on earth? Today, nearly 1 in 5 American preschoolers are still living below the poverty line, even though we've had 10 straight years of economic growth. What does that say to you about where America is today and what we need to do about it?
George, we're in the midst of the most extreme winner-take-all economy in the history of our country. And unfortunately, that extremity is just going to reach unprecedented heights as technology is getting stronger, smarter, more capable all the time. And most of us are not. Most adults feel happy if we stayed about the same on any given day. So if we want to alleviate child poverty, we need to put money directly into the hands of families, particularly single parents. 40% of American children today are born to single moms. 90% of single parents are single moms. And right now, we have fallen into this trap where we have allowed the market to tell us what we are all worth. And what does the market value my wife Evelyn at, or stay-at-home parents around the country? 0. Caregivers taking care of ailing loved ones, like Carl Christensen in Iowa. 0. Volunteers and activists in our communities trying to do something positive. 0. Coaches and mentors helping our kids. 0. Most artists, sorry artists, but it's true. 0. Increasingly local journalists, which is wiping out our ability to have a functioning democracy because you can't vote on something if you actually don't have any news coverage. The mission in this campaign has to be for us to disentangle economic value and human value, say they are not the same things, and make this case to our fellow Americans that we each have intrinsic value as citizens, as human beings, and as owners and shareholders of the richest country in the history of the world.
Mayor Buttigieg.
The problem is America's been counting the wrong things. Now we have a president who says the economy is fantastic because the Dow Jones is looking good. And I'm sure if you've got a building with your name on it close to Wall Street, then that really is the same thing as the economy to you. But the problem is we've had an economy grow and not be able to lift up those most in need, or even so many in the middle. When I'm president, we're going to measure the performance of our economy not by the Dow Jones, but by the income growth of the 90%. Because a good economy is one where children are being lifted out of poverty, just as we focused in South Bend on cutting the poverty rate, in particular the black poverty rate, and making sure families with children were participating in the growth that we did have. But this is one more example of something where the American people want to see change. The American people, not just diehard Democrats, but so many independents and some Republicans think we need to prioritize economic equity, and yet it still doesn't happen. That is why we need to recognize that the time has arrived for a different kind of politics, to turn the page, leave the politics of the past in the past, and deliver a better future before it is too late.
Senator Warren.
So I started my grown-up life as a special education teacher. I learned early on about the worth of every single human being. And I believe that the best investment we can make as a nation, the best investment we can make as human beings, is to invest in our children. And we've had enough of making rhetoric around this. Everyone says they love the kids. But here's the deal. It's time to come up with real plans to make that happen. I've talked before about a 2-cent wealth tax, but the whole idea behind it is we can do early childhood education and good quality child care, universal pre-K for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old in America. And we can stop exploiting the people, largely black and brown women who do this work, and raise the wages of every child care worker and preschool teacher in America. We want to have a real future in this country. Then invest in our children. Don't leave public education just to our localities and our states. Be a good federal partner. Put real money into our schools. Put real money into housing. Put real money into health care. Put real money into the future of our children. That's how we build the America of our best values.
Mr. Vice President.
I come from a family where a dad walked in one day and said, "We got to move. Don't have a job. We got to move to a different city." I watched my dad, and I met many people here in this state and others who've gone through the same thing, where the fathers made that longest walk or the mothers made that longest walk. I was listed for the entire time I was in the United States Congress as the poorest man in the United States Congress. My net worth was net zero a couple times. The fact of the matter is that I've never focused on money for me. And I was a single dad for 5 years. It's not as hard as being a single mom, and I had help from my sisters in the audience and others. But the fact is that I think we have to focus on what is at stake here. These aren't someone else's children. They're all our children. They're the kite strings that lift our national ambitions. No, they really are. That lift our national ambitions aloft. We have an overwhelming interest in seeing to it they do well. You know, 24 out of every 100 students in school today, from grade school to high school, are Latino. What are we going to do, walk away from that? Many of them come from homes that are poor, very poor. That's why I invest so much time and energy in preschool. That's why if I only have $1 to spend, I spend it equipping the child before they get into school in the early days than after. And we talk about all those kids out there that are going to be graduating. A great number of them aren't going to, as Mr. Yang said, aren't going on to college, although I think we should help with college. They're not going on to college. What they're going to do, they're going to be equipped to compete in the 21st century by training them for the new trades, the new opportunities, the new capabilities that are out there. We must focus on our children. Like I said, they're all our children. They're not somebody else's kids. Everyone, as my father would say, is entitled to be treated with dignity and respect, and we're not doing it.
Senator Sanders.
Well, the answer to your question is why we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth, disproportionately high for the African American community, by the way, is the same reason that we give massive trillion-dollar tax breaks to the rich and large corporations. Same reason that we give tens of billions of dollars in subsidies and tax breaks to the fossil fuel industry, while half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. The same reason that we have 3 people in America owning more wealth than the bottom half of America. The same reason that we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a human right. Same reason as to why we are paying, in some cases, 10 times more than other countries for prescription drugs. And that reason is that our priorities are determined by the 1% and by wealthy campaign contributors. Our priorities are determined by those who want to see the rich get richer and are turning their backs on the working families of this country. And what is unique about our campaign is we say unashamedly, we are raising our campaign contributions not from billionaires, but from working class people. That our campaign is about the working families of this country, for the working class of this country. And that is the administration that we will run. It is time to take on the big money interest. It is time to change our national priorities. Thank you.
Senator Klobuchar.
In Koki's memory, let me answer this question. We may have lost an election in 2016, Democrats, but we did not lose hope. And there is a way. It's actually based on a National Academy of Science report, and I've used that to put together a plan to reduce child poverty in half in 10 years and eradicate it in a generation. We can do it with investment in childcare. We can do it with investment in preschool and school, and we can do it with tax credits, and we can get it done. But to get it done, we have to be able to reach those voters that we lost in this state and across the country. There's an old story of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and when he died, his body was put on a train and went up across America. And there was a guy standing by those tracks along with so many Americans, and he had his hat on his chest and he was sobbing. And a reporter said, "Sir, did you know the president?" And the guy says, "No, I didn't know the president, but he knew me. He knew me." And I will tell you this, there is a complete lack of empathy in this guy in the White House right now. And I will bring that to you. If you have trouble stretching your paycheck to pay for that rent, I know you, and I will fight for you. If you have trouble deciding if you're going to pay for your child care or your long-term care, I know you, and I will fight for you. If you have trouble figuring out if you're going to fill your refrigerator or fill your prescription drug, I know you, and I will fight for you. I do not have the biggest name up on this stage. I don't have the biggest bank account. I'm not a political newcomer with no record, but I have a record of fighting for people. I'm asking you to join us at amyklobuchar.com. I'm asking you to believe that someone who totally believes in America can win this, because if you are tired of the extremes in our politics and the noise and the nonsense, you have a home with me. Please, New Hampshire, I would love your vote, and I would love the vote of America. Thank you.
Mr. Steyer.
So, the Republicans have a cruel plan, and their plan is pretty simple. It's to cut taxes on the richest Americans and the biggest corporations, and then they pay for it by cutting education for kids, by cutting health care across the board, by allowing corporations to pollute as much as they want, and then they try and break unions and the organized labor movement. It's very simple. That's what Mr. Trump's plan is, and it's true in every single red state. But we are not going to win by just criticizing Mr. Trump. I know that there is a better America out there, and that America lives in our hearts and minds. And that America understands that when a kid succeeds in Columbia, South Carolina, that is a triumph for every American. And the same is true of a kid in Las Vegas, Nevada. Mr. Trump has no idea what prosperity looks like across this country. It's not just that he does bad things. He doesn't understand that investing in education and healthcare and good union jobs is actually an investment in our common humanity and in growth in the future, mobility, and justice. That is the America that lives in our hearts and minds that will beat Mr. Trump, because he will never be able to imagine it. So in fact, what we need to do is have a new conception, a new dream of America, dream it and make it happen. Imagine the mountain, and then we climb it together. We are in perilous times. I am asking for your vote. Let's rise together.
Candidates, thank you. Thanks for a great debate tonight. Thanks to our audience here at St. Anselm College. Thanks to our partners, WMUR and Apple News. And now I'd like to send it to my colleagues, Martha Raddatz.
Thanks very much, George, and good evening from high above the debate stage here in Manchester after the sometimes fiery exchanges between the top 7 Democratic candidates. It was a profoundly important debate, the last big chance for the candidates to make their case before the first-in-the-nation primary this Tuesday. We have a lot to discuss, and we will be heading over to the spin room with my colleague Tom Yamas and our panel of ABC political contributors shortly. But first, here with me as we watch the candidates leave the stage. Elizabeth Warren leaving rather quickly there. Pete Buttigieg staying on stage. Joe Biden as well, and Bernie Sanders. A big hug there between Pete Buttigieg and his husband, Chasten. Bernie Sanders, his wife, Jane. They're Chasten and Pete Buttigieg again. Bernie Sanders, a long day that started this morning. Pete Buttigieg going towards the audience there, shaking some hands. Joining me here on the stage up here, Jon Karl, our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, our senior congressional correspondent, Joe Biden coming back over there to the audience as well to meet his wife there, Dr. Jill Biden, a big hug. A very big night for Joe Biden. He had a lot to get through tonight. Also joining me is our senior White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega, and our Nightline co-anchor, Byron Pitts. And Jon Karl, as we watch the candidates on the stage after this very lively and very important and very deep debate, truly. It was an excellent debate, lots of great questions. What's your impression?
It really is. I have to say, I think this was a breakthrough night for Amy Klobuchar. This was by far her best debate. She took on her opponents, especially Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg, but she also made a coherent and forceful case for her candidacy as a Democrat who has won among Democrats, but has also won among the voters the Democrats failed to win in 2016. So I thought a very big night for Amy Klobuchar. Also, Pete Buttigieg.
As we're looking at Joe Biden there.
Yeah, and Pete Buttigieg I thought had a good night. He went after Biden pretty hard. Biden went after him. But what was interesting about what Mayor Pete did here is he also had probably the most forceful defense that I have heard against Donald Trump's attacks on Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, and by far a more forceful defense against those attacks than Joe Biden himself has offered.
And Cecilia, as we're watching Joe Biden there, your impressions of Joe Biden this evening and how do you think he did?
Well, one of my first impressions came with one of his very first comments, Martha, when he essentially conceded defeat here in New Hampshire. He's very clearly focused on heading off to the next round in South Carolina, to Nevada, where the voters there more reflect his supporters. We're talking about a much more diverse group of voters. We're talking about a much more blue-collar class of voters. He had to perform tonight. I don't know that he performed as well as he needed to outshine him here in New Hampshire. Really, on that stage today was Pete Buttigieg. He is a front runner now. He is performing like he is someone in this front runner pack after Iowa, despite the caucuses and what happened there. But he had a target on his back on that stage and really went down swinging tonight.
And Mary, your impression, I know we were talking as we were watching the debate, same thing that John said about Amy Klobuchar, that was an especially strong close as well.
Yeah, and so much of tonight's debate was really about that central question about age and experience. And she was really hammering her experience, arguing that it's not a bad thing necessarily to have a little bit of a Washington record. She took some very pointed attacks, I thought, against Pete Buttigieg, making some digs at his age, calling him a newcomer. At one point, she made a joke about how he was eager to turn the channel from impeachment because he wanted to go back and watch cartoons. That's not actually exactly how he phrased it, but that's where she took it. And I think she did make a forceful case, and she did break through, I think, in a way that she really hasn't before. Now, Joe Biden, to Cecilia's point, he had to bring it tonight. After that dismal fourth-place finish, he really had to step it up. And we did see him launching some fierce attacks at the beginning, going after Bernie Sanders on Medicare for All, going after Pete Buttigieg for what he argues is his inexperience. But then he seemed to fall back into that comfortable debate zone that he has, where he really relies on his resume a lot. And of course, that's the bulk of his campaign, is his experience, and he hammered that away over and over again. But look, his campaign needs a bit of a reset, and I'm just not sure if he could deliver on that tonight.
And Byron Pitts, as we're watching the candidates who clearly didn't look exhausted after this week. I think we were all expecting them to be a bit exhausted after this incredible week. Here comes Joe Biden. He's going right back out there again. He's clearly enjoying this. I would say one thing, and Mary was talking about this earlier with me as well. Klobuchar has had many moments in debates. She's had some strong debates, but she still doesn't seem to move up, and in fact has faded a bit. Do you think this will take her back up in the polls?
You would have to think, if it doesn't, what will? I mean, I think most reasonable people would say she may have won tonight, but will it translate into money tomorrow? Will it push her campaign forward? So one of the things that sort of surprised me about tonight, as we look at Vice President Biden, was that
they are clearly enjoying this. Right? Andrew Yang there was jumping up and down for a while.
So Biden isn't expected to do well in New Hampshire. That he has to do well in South Carolina, which has a larger black vote. Race didn't come up in this debate until about 90 minutes in, and it came up from Tom Steyer, who brought it up, and then they engaged. One thing I want to say about how I thought all of the candidates, when it came to the conversation about race, 90 minutes in, I thought in some ways all of them were tone deaf. Because so often when they discuss race, it is about the pathology of the black experience. It is about the black nightmare, not about the dreams of African Americans, because it came up in their conversation about criminal justice reform. I think that is a blind spot for them that will hurt them down the road.
And I do want to go back to Pete Buttigieg. He really was, and I know we've mentioned all this, he really was the one with the target on his back tonight. And let's listen to a few of those clips.
He's a mayor of a small city who has done some good things, but has not demonstrated he has the ability to, and we'll soon find out, to get a broad scope of support across the spectrum, including African Americans and Latinos.
It is much harder to lead and much harder to take those difficult positions, because I think this going after every single thing that people do because it's popular to say and makes you look like a cool newcomer.
We need people with experience. That's why I'm worried about Mayor Pete. You need to be able to go toe-to-toe with this guy and take him down on the debate stage, or we're going to lose.
So where does Pete Buttigieg end up after tonight? Pretty steady throughout.
Well, I mean, I got to say, he did go toe-to-toe with them. I mean, he got beat up by everybody on that stage, and he hit back. I thought he wasn't a perfect...
And he didn't take the bait, really.
No.
He just hit back.
It was not a perfect night for him. I thought his answer on the question of decriminalization of drugs, he seemed to waffle a little bit on that. The question from Lindsey on race, I thought he seemed a little bit uneasy on that. But in terms of the hits that he took from the other candidates, I thought he took them and hit back.
And the question of inexperience.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something that I think the Democrats are really grappling with right now. We keep talking about this identity crisis that they're having, an ideological one over whether the Democrats want to be a moderate group party or they want to be a liberal party. Clearly tonight they're also grappling with this issue of a generational question. Amy Klobuchar said 59 is the new 38. She went right after age when it came to Pete Buttigieg. But Pete Buttigieg's answer to this, he clearly knew that this shot was going to be coming to him tonight. He said, readiness really is about judgment. It's not about tenure. You don't have to have all these years in Washington. We've got a president there now, he's saying, who has no experience in Washington, and their point is, look where we are as a country. But they've really got to decide who they want to be as a party in order to take on Donald Trump, because he's got a great economy right now. He is coming in swinging after a big victory lap this week, and he's ready to fight in the trenches, and they don't know who they are as a party right now.
And they really did go after Donald Trump a lot tonight. Was that the wise thing to do, Byron?
I think they have to, right? Because that is still a threshold question for Democratic voters. Who will do the best job of taking on Donald Trump? And I think they all made an effort at that. I think one can make the argument they should have gone further. And about Buttigieg, Mike Tyson, the great boxer, said everybody has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. I think he was hit in the mouth early. I didn't think he started that strong, but I think as the night went along, he did begin to fight back in an appropriate way.
And probably knew he was going to get hit in the mouth tonight for sure. We're going to have much more in just a moment with Tom Llamas, Chris Christie, Rahm Emanuel in the spin room. But right now, let's pause for a break.
Live in Manchester, the Democratic debate.
welcome back to the ABC News Democratic Debate, the post-debate show underway right now. Hundreds of journalists from all over the world gathering in the spin room as the candidates come by to answer even tougher questions. Right here in the spin room, our studio with the Powerhouse Politics panel, the smartest minds in politics. And we start with Rahm Emanuel. Rahm, the winners and losers tonight for you.
Well, I think a number of candidates advanced their campaign. Mayor Pete, Amy Klobuchar did very well, but her best moment of all the debates was that close, because too often she talks like a senator. Today she talked like, in that close, like a presidential candidate, and that was a big transformation for her. I do think there's some other candidates that didn't do as well as, didn't sense the urgency for their candidacy at this moment, like Senator Warren, who I thought not until the latter half did she come alive. And I think also I would say this, I think there was a very honest discussion about disagreements, agreements, and strategy, which is about the importance of taking on this president and where he is most vulnerable.
And the clock is ticking. The New Hampshire primary is on Tuesday. Governor Christie.
Elections have meaning.
Right. Governor Christie, a moment for you that really stood out?
Well, I think the moment that could be a foreshadowing for the future is when Mayor Pete was up there outright lying about his record on African-American arrests on marijuana, and Lindsay Davis of ABC challenged him more than any candidate on that stage challenged him tonight. And you saw the look on his face. He looked like a deer in the headlights. And let me tell you, he thinks Lindsay Davis is hard. If he ever gets on the same stage with Donald Trump, it's going to be a whole different story who will call him on those things. And I think these other candidates better get serious about calling Mayor Pete on the record in South Bend. And so I think it was a missed opportunity for the other candidates. Elizabeth Warren gave him a little bit of a shot on that, but not nearly enough time spent on it. But what I saw more than anything else as someone who's been a candidate on that stage, that look in his eyes when she came back at him and didn't take his first line of baloney was very telling about what kind of candidate he may be able to be.
Chief Political Analyst Matt Dowd, you know, Mayor Pete had the big showing in Iowa. He has some momentum, and he had a big target tonight on his back.
Yeah, to me, when you look at debates in the midst of a process, you have to look at what the trajectory of the race was coming into the night and what changed the trajectory at the debate. And so what I think happened tonight was the trajectory of the race from Iowa was that this was beginning to become a two-person race between Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg. Not a lot that for what happened tonight changed that trajectory. It still looks like that's emerging. There were some marks left on Pete, but not enough to slow that trajectory. The only person to me that fundamentally changed where they were from where they were coming out of Iowa was Amy Klobuchar. The problem with Amy Klobuchar is, does she change this race from being at 4% to being at 8%, because she's only has 72 hours to adjust this race to where she finishes on next Tuesday night in the primary. But really, you have to look at this as who changed the path, and the path right now has not been fundamentally altered. Joe Biden, I think, had the worst night. Not that he did badly, but Joe Biden had to have his A game and had to do better than anybody else, because his trajectory was on the downward slope, and nothing changed, and his path is still on the downward slope.
Terry Moran, it took a while to even mention that name, Joe Biden. In the beginning of the debate, he did have some moments, but then he seemed to fade as the night went on.
He did, and I think he mistook decibel levels for eloquence at some times. He was kind of haranguing, which is very different from the Biden of old. And I think in general, one of the things you're seeing is Joe Biden is a very different candidate today, an older candidate who slipped in significant ways. But I think in the conversation, the family argument the Democrats are having, how progressive should we be, how centrist we should be, Bernie Sanders is the progressive candidate. Elizabeth Warren is fading. He basically finished her off. She never wanted to take him on in the hope that she would pick up his voters when he declined. The center lane is open, and that's where Amy Klobuchar is rising. So there's going to be essentially two races for a little bit, and then a one-on-one. And I think Klobuchar did herself a lot of good to take that lane.
Yvette Simpson, you have the pulse of the progressive wing of this party. Senator Sanders defended his record. He stood strong on it, but Mayor Pete came at him pretty hard early on in the night.
Yeah, but, you know, Bernie is consistent, and I don't think he was rocked at all. I do think Buttigieg had a hard night, and I don't think it will affect New Hampshire. But really, New Hampshire was never a real issue for Pete Buttigieg. It's South Carolina. And I think him not responding to this race question was really critical. And I think Warren really stuck it to him, and she elevated on the, I mean, she took that race question to a whole nother level. I also wonder about Amy Klobuchar and where her votes come from, and maybe it comes from Biden, because he got rocked by Steyer on this South Carolina issue. His unwillingness to acknowledge that someone in his camp did something wrong, and the fallback, well, black people love me, South Carolinians love me. It was not a good night for him.
You know, Ron, South Carolina is supposed to be the firewall for Joe Biden. Tom Steyer leaned heavily into race today, challenging Joe Biden on that. Could he really hurt the former vice president in South Carolina?
Well, I think what happens, I mean, look, there's 2 states. You've got New Hampshire and Nevada before you get to South Carolina, so I don't think this moment hurts him down there. I think what happens between and the advertising. Let me go back to an earlier question. I thought Mayor Pete did a great moment when he defended Joe Biden and his son, because he went beyond what he had to do. In fact, it was more eloquent sometimes than Joe himself is about what's happening with Hunter. In the same way that I thought for Joe, his best moment was when he defended, obviously, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. Amy had a great close. I think Steyer did bring a discussion of the race issue, and that's what gets me back to Senator Warren. Not until the latter half on certain areas or subjects did she emerge. And I think when you finish where she did in Iowa, here as a senator of Massachusetts bordering, she cannot afford another state to be not in the top 2. And it's a real challenge. So everyone had strong moments. I will agree that Mayor Pete looked like a deer in the headlights when he got hit. On the other hand, when he actually answered what it means to bring people together, what it takes to lead, and he's not wrong having been in the Oval Office. What you want out of somebody is judgment. What nobody ever told him was experience actually lends to judgment and influence and informs it, and nobody really has touched him except for Lindsey. Lindsey's actually laid the biggest hand on him.
As we wrap up this segment, there was one moment that the Trump campaign has already tweeted out, and that was at the beginning of the debate when George asked all the candidates, would you have a problem with the Democratic Socialist at the top of the ticket? It seemed like only Amy Klobuchar raised her hand.
Yeah, listen, I think this is part of the problem for the Democratic Party right now. Rahm said this a few weeks ago. They've got a choice between nominating someone that most people think cannot win or dividing their party violently between mainstream and the progressives. But one other thing on Buttigieg, which I think is important. He also, on decriminalization, he is in favor of decriminalization of all drugs, including heroin and cocaine. He wouldn't answer the question. He's going to be asked that question again, and he better have a better answer than I'm against incarceration. Do you really want to send the message to America's children in the midst of an opioid crisis that it's not a criminal problem to take heroin, to possess cocaine, to possess angel dust? That's what he's saying, and that's inexperience, Tom. That's what inexperience leads to. He put that on his website when nobody knew who the heck he was. Now everybody knows who he is. He better figure the answer to that one out.
And the issue of drugs, opioids, so important in this state of New Hampshire.
In every community in this country.
And all across the country. That is so right.
That's a losing position, and that's not leadership in my view. And Buttigieg got away, and the candidates let him get away with it tonight. To not pound him on that from everybody from Sanders to Steyer.
Everybody knows opiates was a gateway drug to heroin. It's a big challenge, not just here in New Hampshire, all over the country. And the issue of there's a difference between marijuana and a whole sort of other drugs that lead to violence and other types of activities.
We're going to have much more on that. The spotlight, the pressure is definitely on in Mayor Pete. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to have much more from the smartest political minds in the game, and also more from Martha Raddatz. We are just getting started here in Manchester. Stay with us.
back with our ace political team tonight. And Mary Bruce, I want to start with you, our senior congressional correspondent. Your thoughts on Elizabeth Warren? She, for a good deal of that debate, disappeared.
Yeah, I was surprised by how she wasn't really dominating as much as she had in previous debates. You know, she did sort of seem to fade at points. She wasn't drawing as sharp a contrast with some of her rivals as she had in the past. She did have a couple moments, and she did continue, of course, to hammer that theme that she has been over and over again, that the best way to beat Donald Trump is by taking on corruption, that if you go that route, that, well, she too can win the electability argument and unite the Democratic Party, but she just didn't seem to have that big standout moment. And she needs that because, as we've been discussing, she needs a win in one of these early states. I think she was hoping that her near home state advantage here may help give her that boost, but I didn't really see that tonight.
And John Karl, Bernie Sanders, people went on the attack about socialism very early on in the debate. Pete Buttigieg going right after him.
Well, first of all, that was an interesting moment when is anybody on the stage concerned about having a Democratic socialist at the top of the ticket? And you really only had Amy Klobuchar go there. Steyer ended up raising his hand too. But I got to say, Bernie Sanders is getting better and better at this as well. I think what Bernie Sanders does is he takes the hit, and he took the hits. I mean, for a while he was the one taking all the shots. He takes the hits and he pivots and he puts it right at Donald Trump. He acted like a front runner in that line.
And he doesn't change his message ever.
At all. And that line at the beginning, we're going to support whoever wins this damn thing. I mean, he, made that pitch for unity, took all the shots, didn't hit back, pivoted right to Donald Trump.
And Cecilia, I want to talk to you about Donald Trump was talked a lot about tonight. We had the moment where Joe Biden called for the standing ovation for Alexander Vindman. Was that the right tactic? And did, in your mind, anyone prove they could beat Donald Trump?
He certainly was the 8th person on this stage tonight who wasn't here. I think the Democrats are still struggling. Here we are all these years later after Donald Trump candidacy and now a Donald Trump presidency with how to go head to head with him. They don't know if the right move is to you go low, we go high, or to get in the mud and get down and dirty and go take the Donald Trump tactic that is insults and shots. They still don't know. I'll tell you what, the president's team is watching tonight. They've sent a campaign out, and I will tell you what it says. It says President Trump will crush whichever Democrat is unlucky enough to face him in November. So carrying along with the same bravado that the president has shown. But look, Martha, he has upped his attacks in recent days against Bloomberg, against Sanders. We know he's still eyeing Joe Biden. Joe Biden could do some harm if he had to in some of the Rust Belt states. So he's got his eyes certainly on those 3 right now. And he does like to dip in on the Warren attack pool fairly regularly.
Whenever he needs to,
yeah, you've heard those nicknames.
And Byron, do you think anybody or who did it best in that way to prove to voters that they could beat Donald Trump?
Frankly, I don't think anyone did a great job of it. I mean, I think they all make usual arguments, but to the point that Governor Christie was making, that you saw, for instance, with Mayor Pete, that his response to Lindsey Davis wasn't strong enough. I was struck by, next to going after Donald Trump, they all went after Michael Bloomberg. So I thought he may have fared worse of anyone because they all made an argument as to why this billionaire. Right.
And John Karl, just very quickly, you had about 3 seconds here. Who do you think stood out in terms of going after Donald Trump? You deal with Donald Trump every single day.
First of all, obviously the candidate that he feared most early on was Joe Biden. That is not the case anymore, and I don't think there was anybody, based on tonight's performance, that has the Trump campaign quaking in their boots.
Okay, thanks very much, John, and we'll be right back. So more than ever, we will all be keeping our eyes on the New Hampshire primary on Tuesday. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our debate coverage continues right now on ABC News Live, our 24/7 streaming channel, with more analysis and candidate interviews with our team. Nightline later with Byron Pitts here at the debate. George will be back tomorrow morning on GMA. For George, David, Lindsay, and all my colleagues here tonight, I'm Martha Raddatz. Good night from New Hampshire.
Live from the Spin Room at St. Anselm College in Manchester, New Hampshire. Here now, Tom Llamas.
Welcome to the post-debate show live from Manchester right now. We have a full hour of politics to talk about. Joining me right now, Yvette Simpson, Rahm Emanuel, Governor Chris Christie, Matt Dowd, and Terry Moran. And coming up in just moments, we will have a live interview with Mayor Pete Buttigieg, where the spotlight was on him tonight at the debate, including from Senator Amy Klobuchar, and this moment where she went after the mayor and his record.
But what you said, Pete, as you were campaigning through Iowa, as three of us were jurors in that impeachment hearing, you said it was exhausting to watch and that you wanted to turn the channel and watch cartoons. It is easy to go after Washington because that's a popular thing to do. It is much harder, as I see Senator Shaheen in the front row, such a leader. It is much harder to lead and much harder to take those difficult positions, because I think this going after every single thing that people do because it's popular to say and makes you look like a cool newcomer, I don't think that's what people want right now. We have a newcomer in the White House, and look where it got us.
And joining us now, that quote-unquote cool newcomer from Senator Amy Klobuchar. Mayor Pete, thank you so much for joining us. You had a strong showing in Iowa, a victory with Senator Sanders, and tonight you had a very big target on your back. What was the pressure on tonight?
Well, it's to be expected. We're competing for the highest office in the land. But what I was able to do this evening is share a vision that I see so many Americans hungry for, especially here in New Hampshire, where I'm seeing not just fellow Democrats, but a lot of independents who are just sick of the status quo, hungry for change, and insisting on a way to do that, to bring that change, to govern and to win. That's about inclusion, belonging, and bringing more people in. That served us very well up to this point, and that's going to be our focus, connecting with voters here on the ground in New Hampshire, too.
You know, there was a moment at the beginning of the debate when George Stephanopoulos asked everyone if they'd be okay with a Democratic socialist at the top of the ticket, if anyone had a problem with it. I think only Senator Klobuchar raised her hand. Would you be okay with that?
Well, look, I think it's certainly problematic in terms of the approach that Senator Sanders is taking, because it effectively says if you're not with us 100% of the time, you don't even belong in this movement. Now, I'm going to support whoever the nominee is. Of course, I am working to make sure that I am that nominee. But we also got to remember that we've got to come out of this unified.
You know, you used a phrase that struck me, and it was command people when you were talking about Senator Sanders and some of his programs. And to me, as somebody whose parents fled Cuba, I knew what you were talking about. Is it a danger? Are you saying essentially Senator Sanders could be a danger to this country as a socialist?
This is just why I don't think that that healthcare proposal he's put forward is a good idea. It tells everybody you've got to get on this plan whether you want to or not. And as somebody who actually I believe that we can do better with a public plan. I also believe that the right way to do it is to give people a choice. Let's have a little bit of humility about our policy. After all, if we are right as Democrats that public plan will be the best one, well, then everybody's going to want it. But if we're wrong, at least in the case of some families or some people, I'm thinking of union workers who negotiate excellent private plans, sometimes at the expense of their wages. Why would you order them onto a public plan if they'd rather be on something else? Let them decide. We still solve the problem. There's no such thing as an uninsured American, and it also doesn't divide the country the way that this plan would. I'm not just worried about winning. I'm worried about governing.
One of the knocks on you is that you have a problem with minority voters. And after we leave New Hampshire here, where your poll numbers are up, we go to Nevada and then South Carolina. You've had issues at at home with black constituents. What do you say to people who say you can't unify this party and they're not rallying around you? People of color are not rallying around you.
Well, it's just not true. Minority voters, especially those who know me best in South Bend, are among my strongest supporters. It's why we've got so much support from black elected officials in my community.
But Mayor Pete, we also saw that moment earlier, though, before the voting started, when residents confronted you and asked you if you even cared about black people.
We had a really tough situation when we had a police shooting in our city. Look, I don't get the luxury of just calling for good things to happen or debating these issues in committee rooms or just taking votes on them. When you're a mayor on the ground, you have to deal with these things, and they are tough. And of course, we did not fix systemic racism in 8 years in South Bend, but they're only telling part of the story if somebody's pointing to the challenges we face. We were nationally recognized for our race-informed work on creating economic opportunity, cut black unemployment, cut black poverty, and took real steps on reforming policing too. And that's the story that I want to make sure that people hear from South Bend, and it's why I'm making sure they hear it not only from me, but from black elected officials in my hometown who are supporting us on the road too.
Following the debate, we talked with our powerhouse panel here, and for a lot of the people on this panel and some of the smartest political minds in the game, they said there was the moment when our colleague Lindsay Davis asked you about your record when it came to drugs and prosecuting criminals, prosecuting people who use drugs. Looking back on your record, do you wish you would have done things differently, and are you re-examining your record on drug abuse?
Well, of course, it hasn't been perfect. This is exactly why I'm calling for systemic change. Look, the clear solution here is for us to legalize marijuana, period. But on the ground, in cities across America, South Bend, but every other city too, we don't just get to debate these things or say what we think ought to happen. We actually have to roll up our sleeves and work to get things done. And as a mayor of a diverse, low-income city, I will arrive in the White House with an understanding not just of the theory, not just of the plans, not just of the right things to say, but of the good, the bad, and the ugly of what it takes to deliver real progress on these issues.
One of the people of our panel is, of course, Governor Chris Christie, who went toe-to-toe with President Trump when he ran 4 years ago. And it's his opinion that someone like you, who hasn't been tested yet, in his opinion, wouldn't be able to stand up to Trump toe-to-toe. What do you say to that?
You know, I've taken worse forms of incoming than a tweet full of typos. I'm going to be just fine going up against this president, but I'm also not going to allow this president to change the subject. You know, the key here is to make sure that we have an election focused on voters' lives. That's what's on the minds of the voters that I'm talking to, whether I'm in New Hampshire or in other places. The fundamental question of every election is, how's my life going to be different as a voter if you're president instead of you? I'm the one trying to get everybody a raise. I'm the one prepared to deliver health care in a way most Americans can get on board with. I'm serious about making sure we actually act, not just talk, on issues ranging from climate change to gun violence. That is how we're going to win. I'm not afraid to confront this president, but I'm not going to let him make it all about him.
Finally, Mayor Pete, there are some in the party that are raising concerns that the party is moving way too far to the left. It sounds like you're raising that same concern. What do you want to tell people in the party who maybe are with Senator Sanders or with other candidates who aren't on your side? What's your argument going to be to bring them into your coalition?
Well, here's my message to progressives in the party. I would be the most progressive presidential nominee we've put forward in a generation. It's just that I've also found a way to put forward these issues that we can bring more and more people on board with. We shouldn't measure the boldness of an idea by how many people it turns off and how much controversy it can generate. We should measure it by how many people we can bring in to do something big that'll make a difference in our actual lives. I would be a president who can deliver that change, not just say the right things, but make it happen.
Any predictions for Tuesday?
Well, I predict we're going to have a great night.
All right. Well, smart answer. All right, Mayor Pete, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it. Martha, I know you want to take apart that interview a little bit with your panel upstairs and then bring it back down to us, but Martha, take it away.
Yeah, it was a smart answer. He said he'll have a great night Tuesday. Let's see how you guys feel about that. Will he have a great night Tuesday, John?
Well, I mean, he's the one with the momentum, and I think that he was the person that was being targeted on that stage for a while, along with Bernie Sanders. And as we discussed earlier, his most difficult moments actually came from the moderators, not from his fellow candidates. I don't think he handled Lindsay Davis's question on race particularly well, and he's going to have some explaining to do in terms of his policy on decriminalizing drugs.
But he did have a couple moments where he did fire back. I mean, he did early on try and go after Bernie Sanders, arguing that on health care especially, like you can't just draw a distinction. He was saying you can't just have some all or nothing, right? You have to have a plan that will work for everyone and give people options. That's his argument. So he was pushing back, but he definitely took more incoming than he did outgoing.
He's got to now be ready for this next phase of what's to come. Whatever happens here in New Hampshire, he's now in the front runner pack, and he's going to get scrutinized not just by his.
A couple of people aren't.
And a couple of people aren't. And I think that's what New Hampshire ends up really being about, is it really starts to clear the pack out. And I think in a few days, if not weeks, we will start to see this pack dwindle down a little bit more. But Pete Buttigieg is now going to start being heavily scrutinized much more by the media. He is going to come under fire from tonight on forward by his fellow candidates. And he's got to not be able to stumble back physically on some of those answers, particularly when it comes to race in the city that he has
Which are the kind of questions he probably should have been a little bit more prepared for. But right now we're going to take it back to Tom Yamas, who is standing by with Elizabeth Warren.
Martha, thank you so much for that. That is right. We are with Senator Elizabeth Warren. Senator Warren, you are on home turf tonight here at St. Anselm College in Manchester, New Hampshire, not too far from your home state. I have to ask you, some people on our Powerhouse panel here felt that this was your home turf. You should have taken over, and there were moments in the debate where you seemed to disappear.
Well, had my hand up, wanted to talk, but the way I see it is there was a lot of crosstalk in this debate, and our number one job here is going to be to beat Donald Trump. And the way that happens, we got to pull our party together, and we've got to run on some core Democratic issues that unite us and that actually pull in independents and Republicans. For me, that starts with talking about corruption. We are should be running against the most corrupt president in history. This impeachment that we've just gotten through, he's doing a victory lap. Are you kidding me? What lies right at the heart of it is an ambassador who paid $1 million to get his spot. And it's more evidence of Donald Trump showing every day he thinks government's there for him personally, to help his politics, to help make his family richer, to help his cronies. We need to draw the contrast against that and be serious about telling the American people and showing the American people. We've had enough of government by corruption. I have the biggest anti-corruption plan since Watergate. I think it's time we get out there as Democrats and not just say, but show that we are willing to make this government work, not for those at the top, but for everyone else.
Looking back at Iowa, third place finish, you campaigned hard there. Why do you think you finished third?
So, look, we made it in the top 3, and I'm glad of that. We're now in New Hampshire, and I'm ready to focus on New Hampshire. And after this, we've got 54 more states and territories. I've built out in 30 states. I'll tell you something. One of the consequences of deciding not to fund my race by spending 70% of my time fundraising with rich people and corporate lobbyists meant I had a lot of money, a lot of time to go all around the country. So I've already visited 31 states and Puerto Rico. I've done town halls and selfies in all of them. It gives you a chance to listen. It gives you a chance to meet people. It gives you a chance to talk about the issues that touch people's lives.
Our entrance polls on the night of the Iowa caucuses said health care was the #1 issue that voters cared about in that state. And reporters who covered your campaign noted that you stopped talking about health care, Medicare for all, at the beginning of the year. Those were reports. I mean, that's fair. That reporting was out there. Is there a reason why you stopped focusing on health care?
So I took unfiltered questions. That's been my way of doing this. And what happened right about the first of the year is I way shortened up what I say at the topper and then tried to get to 10 questions randomly drawn from the audience. So I answered whatever people were asking about. But I will say this about it, because I do think it's important when we talk about health care. I talked about it on the stage tonight. 36 million Americans couldn't afford to get a prescription filled, and that includes people with health insurance. The way we need to be thinking about health insurance is twofold. First, get as much help to as many people as quickly as we can. Defend the Affordable Care Act and use the power of the president to bring down drug prices. I'm going to use the march-in orders that are already in law to be able to reduce the price of insulin and EpiPens and HIV/AIDS drugs. That's really important for us to do. And second is to remember, in a general election, we're running against a guy who wants to cut health care for millions of people and who is actively working right now to discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions to end the Affordable Care Act. This is going to be a fight we're going to win.
Senator Warren, we want to look at a moment now from the debate when you and Mayor Pete went at it over criminal justice reform.
These things are all connected, but that's the point. So are all of the things that need to change in order for us to prevent violence and remove the effects of systemic racism, not just from criminal justice, but from our economy, from health, from housing, and from our democracy itself.
Senator Warren, is that a substantial answer from Mayor Buttigieg?
No. You have to own up to the facts. And it's important to own up to the facts about how race has totally permeated our criminal justice system.
So we just talked to Mayor Pete here. He said he could always sort of look back and do things differently. I'm paraphrasing what he said, but you don't think he's done enough, and you don't think what he did as mayor was right.
Look, she asked the question about whether he had answered about the numbers. What I think is important is that we recognize the systemic racism, not just in the criminal justice system. We can't just say, oh, we'll talk about race now, so it'll always be about criminal justice. It's really about the systemic racism in education, in healthcare, in housing. And that's what leads me to say we can't just be an America that says if we don't mention race in the laws, then somehow everything is race neutral. It's not. The time has come that we have to talk about race-conscious laws. Look, Jim Crow was still alive and well into the 1960s. The consequence of redlining in America, which was federal law, meant that white families got a real boost in buying homes, while black and brown families were actively discriminated against. It created a black-white wealth gap that persists even today. So we want to make change, then we've really got to talk about race and how it affects all parts of our economy, of our society, and our criminal justice system.
Finally, Senator, you started this race as a fighter, and you had a lot of fire in the campaign trail, and lately sometimes it sounds like your message is you're going to be a unifier. You can sort of bring both factions of the Democratic Party together. Is your message changing, and do you think it's going to work now that the race is on and things are getting aggressive?
So look, our number one job, beat Donald Trump, but I think that bringing our party together is about fighting. It's about fighting for working people. It's about fighting for America's middle class. It's about fighting for our children who are left behind. It's about fighting for people with disabilities who just get pushed aside. It's about fighting for all of the people in this country who just keep losing out to billionaires, to giant corporations. Look, we've got an America where the GDP keeps going up, where the stock market keeps going up, but what's happening to hardworking families across this country? Wages are basically flat, while the cost of housing and health care, child care, sending a kid to school are through the roof. Families can't take this squeeze anymore. Trickle-down economics, the idea of you cut taxes for those at the top and somehow it's all going to work for everybody else, has been a monumental failure. It is destroying America's middle class, it's destroying America's working class, and it is crushing America's poor. We can change that.
I said my last question, but I actually have one more.
Okay.
If you don't win in New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina, do you have a path forward with no victories after 4 races?
So, look, I have built an organization from the ground up, a grassroots movement. We are now in 30 states. We have staff on the ground. We have volunteers coming in because I believe in this fight. This is the fight that I've been fighting all my life for America's middle class. And now we're close. 2020 is our opportunity, not to go backwards, our opportunity to build an America that works for everyone.
Senator Warren, thank you so much for your time, and
Thank
good
you
luck
for
on
having
Tuesday,
me.
okay?
Thank you
so
to be
much.
here.
I'm going to actually turn it back now to our powerhouse panel here because they are dying to talk. Rahm Emanuel, Chris Christie, I don't know if they've ever been silent that long, but they've behaved. And so now, Rahm, I actually want to start with you because I think I know what you're going to say. Were you going to say maybe we should have seen that candidate out on the stage during the debate?
No. Here's what I think. As I said before, everybody had a strong moment. Everybody had a moment where their knees got a little wobbly. Some people advanced themselves. Some people kind of stayed in neutral. My bigger concern as a Democrat, nobody there today, until the very end when we're about to talk to Senator Amy Klobuchar, after about 2 hours, nobody before that moment actually looked like they could stand on a stage with Donald Trump. You can talk about beating him, you can talk about a number. We didn't have yet that. And that, we got to be honest. Now, that develops over time. I'm not expecting that right now, but there were flashes of strength, flashes where people had some wobbly moments in answering questions. But no, well, you have to basically close your eyes, see them on a stage with Trump, and say, who really looked like they were going to go mano to mano, toe to toe? Because he's a vicious debater. We saw what he did with Hillary. And so that's my concern as a Democrat is we're not there yet, and we have a ways to go.
Okay, we have actually Joe Biden, Governor Chris Christie. Hold on one second. We have former Vice President Joe Biden with Martha Raddatz. Martha.
President Joe Biden with all of us. He sat down with all of our political panel. It's a team booking effort. We really
grabbed him.
We grabbed him. We grabbed him. We hollered. We did whatever we can. So we're all going to jump in on this. But Vice President Biden, I just want to ask you how you felt it went tonight. Did you give the effort you wanted to do? Was this a do or die night?
Well, I don't think it's a do or die night. I really don't. I think, it's the first of 4, and we're going to go into Super Tuesday as well. So I don't think it's a do or die night. But I thought, look, I'm an underdog here. And the fact is that I wanted to make sure that I got to talk about the things that I care about the families like mine that made that longest walk, the people I run into up here, literally all the time. People are in trouble. This idea the economy is good. Try it when you, in fact, are losing your job, or you have a job, you can't keep your house, you can't make things work for you. And so that's why I'm in this thing to begin with. And so it gave me an opportunity to talk about things I care about, from health care to middle-class issues.
So something we've been talking about up here tonight is how do the Democrats take on President Trump? You've got your nickname. A lot of the folks on the stage have the nickname. You see the tweets, and the fight can be nasty. Do you get in the mud? Do you get in the dirt with him? Do you go low? They go high? What is the winning strategy in that?
The winning strategy is to go after him on the issues. Look. One of the reasons I decided I might not run this time was I knew it was going to be ugly for my family, and particularly my grandkids. This is the God's truth. We have a deal in our family, I've spoken about it before, that any child can ask for a family meeting. For real. It's genuine. And I got a call from my granddaughter, who's now a senior at Columbia Law School, and my 2 other granddaughters are now at Penn and freshmen and juniors, and my deceased son's 2 kids. They called on Wednesday, and they said, can we meet on Sunday? And they came down from New York, Philly, and my son's children live near me. And they walked in and said, Pop, you got to run. And I said, guys, this is going to be not very nice, this whole thing. And they said, we know it won't, Pop. And their whole life, their father or their grandfather has been an attorney general, a senator, or a vice president. And my little guy who came up tonight, Hunter, he's now in 7th grade. Excuse me, in 8th grade.
We all need it.
Said, Pop, look, and he took out his cell phone. My word to this. And it was a picture of me walking out of my son's funeral, Bo's funeral, military funeral, my hand on a flag-draped casket with the military escorting him out. And I'm reaching down, I'm holding my little guy, and I used to hold my son under the chin like this, joke with him, look how tall you're getting. And I'm leaning down, and he shows me the picture, and the caption underneath said, Biden molests another child. Mm-hmm. They said, I didn't say Trump did that. What I'm saying is it's just going to be really mean. But when they decided that, they thought that, and I know it's going to be ugly. But look, the thing about Trump is that he has no sense of empathy. I think very little sense of decency and decorum and what constitutes being a decent person. And I acknowledge that, but what I got to talk about is what he's done to people in terms of the policies. His foreign policy is an absolute disaster. We are in terrible shape worldwide, number one. Number two, if he's elected again, I promise you, NATO will not exist as it does now. Our alliances in the Far East are going to change. And so there's so many things that I think I can just debate him on the merits, the place he doesn't know much about.
Mr. Vice President, you definitely turned it up a notch for this debate. I mean, you showed some punch, you showed some passion that I did not see in the earlier debates, but I was struck by something that you said at the very top of this debate. You said that you took a hit in Iowa and you'll probably take a hit here in New Hampshire as well. I've never seen a candidate come into a debate essentially predicting his own defeat in the next electoral college. Why did you
because I think, look, I've been the front runner all along here. I've had that target on my back from the beginning. The fact is, up in New Hampshire, I'm an underdog because of the fact that, you know, Bernie won this place by 20 points last time. The neighboring senators have gigantic influence. And so I think I'm an underdog. And but I wanted to make the point, it didn't matter because I'm not going to walk away. Like I said, you know, I've lost a lot of things before and in the past, but I'll be damned if I'm going to lose to this guy Trump, to lose the country to. And so when you say I came out, you know, I decided that the attacks that are going on with me, I've basically not responded to the last whatever months. But this idea that, you know, Bernie talking about, and he's a good guy, but Bernie talking about Biden has a lot of baggage. Baggage, you know. Everybody, we have to win the Senate back. You think everybody, I mean, he labels himself a democratic socialist. This is going to be a field day for the president.
Why didn't you raise your hand when George asked if anybody was concerned about the idea of a democratic socialist?
Oh, I already made I made it clear I was concerned because I already spoken. I said I think it's going to be difficult for, look, I don't know that Bernie's he has great support, but I don't know he's been invited into campaign for any of those frontline competitors that won last time. I went into 24 states with over 65 candidates. They all wanted me in. They're asking me to come in again. Most of the frontline candidates have come forward and supported me. So I didn't have to pile it on, but when, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on like those fake videos that were put out about Biden on Social Security, which, you know, has been just rated simply not true at all, and all the emails that go out. And so I didn't, you know, I mean, he talks about a vote that I made 30 years ago and whatever it is. And, you know, look, this is a guy, while I was beating my neck trying to make sure we passed the assault weapons ban, or before that, even the Brady bill, he voted against it 5 times. He also voted.
But look at his approval rating right now. It's higher than it's been. His approval rating is going up.
No, I agree, and I think it's because the fact that you know, if I'm not looking to run a negative campaign, I'm running against Trump. But the fact is that when you say things that are going out there that are not true about others, and, you know, about who has the record, who's carrying baggage, I mean, come on. I mean, you know, this guy voted, and he's a good guy, but he voted to give gun manufacturers an exemption? How many people died in the streets and nothing was done about it because we're not able to go after the gun manufacturers like drug, tobacco, and the rest? I mean, it's carnage out there.
But, Mr. Vice President, you have also been sharpening your attacks against Mayor Pete Buttigieg. He has a lot of momentum right now, the other moderate in this race. How do you explain his rise?
Well, I think he's a very quality guy. I think he has a great organization. He, quite frankly, out-organized us in Iowa. But again, Pete keeps talking about everything was bad before, you know, all the past was bad. Since when did the Democrats think Barack Obama didn't do a good job? You guys covered me. I had major responsibility in the Obama administration. The president would turn over responsibility and give me presidential authority to deal with it. But this idea, all these bad things, I mean, I don't know where he was living. I don't know where he, you know, and it's not like we're returning to the past. We were just getting started. Everything landed on President Obama's desk but locusts. We got us out of the most serious recession, short of a depression in American history. We're finally getting things moving. We got hundreds of thousands of troops, combat troops, out of harm's way. We brought them home. We were moving. The economy was rising. I mean, look, Trump inherited everything. He inherited a good economy with more consecutive months of growth and progress than anyone else has ever had in terms of just straight months. He inherited it. Now he's messing it up.
But could Buttigieg be another Obama? Because you went after Obama in that 2008 primary as not having the experience.
Well,
that's what you're saying.
To be a vice president.
Well,
yes. No, I'm joking.
But that's the argument you made against Obama. Now you're making the argument against Buttigieg.
No, because I don't know. At least Barack had a clear view of what his strategic notion was on foreign policy. He had a clear view of it.
You don't think Buttigieg does?
Well, I haven't heard it if he does. I don't know what it is yet, number one. Number two, I think, being a mayor of a town smaller than Manchester is not quite like being a United States Senator from the state of Illinois, even though it was only a short amount of time. And Barack's experience was much wider as well. So, but look, that old joke, I know Barack Obama. He's no Barack Obama. He's a rare breed, Barack Obama. He was an unusual person, and best thing I ever had happen was working with him.
One of the things that Tom Steyer said tonight was that we're 90 minutes into this debate and no one has talked about race yet. Do the people who were on that stage tonight, yourself included, accurately and fairly represent the people who will be voting for you in this election?
I represent them better than any person on the stage and all of them combined. I've been engaged in the civil rights movement. I've been engaged in the civil rights community. I've been engaged with the black community my entire career. That's what got me involved in politics to begin with. And even a lot of the younger reporters covering me initially were saying, well, then they went to Delaware and found out where it is. Look, the black community knows me and I know them. And I think we take it for granted much too much. The context of that was no one had asked the questions. We tend to answer the questions that were asked. It hadn't been asked yet. No one had mentioned it. And my biggest concern about the African-American community with the Democrats is most of us take them for granted. They just take it as good they're going to show up. They don't show up, but they know when you care about them. They know you. They know if you really mean it. And they know I mean it. And we'll soon find out.
And Mr. Vice President, we're going to let you go now here in a minute. But where would you place this debate in the other debates you've been in? Best? Second best? Do anything over? I'm not a pundit. I don't know. All I know is I was able to say what I wanted to say, and I'm going to continue to speak out on the things I care about. For example, on health care. I think the one thing the American people are entitled to is authenticity. You got to tell the truth. The idea you're going to pass a multi-trillion-dollar bill and say you don't know how much it's going to cost eventually and who's going to pay for it, it's bizarre. And by the way, you don't have the votes for it now, even if you knew exactly how much it would cost in the Senate. Or the fact you're going to go out and say, I got a wealth tax that's going to take care of everything, of about $60 trillion worth of cost for the next 10 years, paying off all student loans. And the American people and I think will get killed by Trump if you come off with something that's not even remotely authentic and able to be done. Okay, thanks very much for joining us, Mr. Vice President. We appreciate John's running and our yelling. Appreciate it.
It's late.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate you sticking around.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And we're going to go over to Tom Yamas and Amy Klobuchar.
All right, Martha, thank you. And let me know if there's any video of John Carl running after the vice president. I would pay to see that. Senator Amy Klobuchar, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be on. Thank you.
And if you're still watching ABC News Live, this is a special feature. The senator has agreed to enter the Thunderdome. So she's gonna answer questions from everybody on this panel.
Oh, wow.
Including some quiet and shy panelists like Governor Chris Christie over there.
Governor Christie. It just shows bravery that we need in a president.
I'm going to let the panel start first, so Yvette, you can start off.
Hello, Senator Klobuchar.
Hello.
There was a really interesting moment early in the debate when the question about whether you think a Democratic socialist can actually win. Everybody kind of hesitated. You raised your hand. You answered the question. Bernie Sanders is the front runner now and could potentially be the nominee. If he is, are you going to support him against Donald Trump?
Well, I've made very clear I'll support whoever our nominee is, but the question was, do you think a socialist should be running our ticket, should be at the head of our ticket for our party? And I said no, because
Even if he gets support of the majority of the delegates.
Well, I've said very clearly, I will support the head of our ticket, so that's a good point. But I think it was more, do you want that person to be heading up the ticket? I do not, because I think we need a candidate that can bring people with her, and that means moderate Republicans, independents, people up here know what I'm talking about, people that maybe stayed home in 2016, or people that voted for Donald Trump. Just having left Iowa, there were 31 counties that had voted for Barack Obama and then turned around and voted for Donald Trump. And so I think bringing those voters in, I am the unique person up on that debate stage that has consistently won in red congressional districts, Michelle Bachmann's district, every single time. And I have done it by telling people the truth, as you can see that I do on the debate stage, by making a case for an economic agenda, and by getting things done. People want a president that can win and can get things done. I think it's that simple.
Rob?
Senator, a lot of discussions are about income inequality, which I actually think is a manifestation of the diploma divide. And I didn't see a lot of discussion today about education. And so the question is, a topic that wasn't really discussed, education. What would be the goal? How do you get there? And what were the things that you've done as a senator that would actually advance education?
That was the one question I wish they had asked. And there's people up here that have worked on this, and I know you have. So I look at it differently than some of my colleagues, including Senator Sanders. And I know they have these bumper sticker solutions like free college for all. I always tease them, they're not thinking big enough. They need to step back and look at our economy. What are the jobs that we have now and we're going to have in the future? We're going to have over 1 million openings for home health care workers. We are going to have over 100,000 openings for nursing assistants. We're going to have over 70,000 openings for electricians. We are not going to have a shortage of sports marketing degrees. We are going to have a shortage of plumbers. And so then you say, how do we make this work? Investment in K through 12 and preschool. That's a big part of my plan. Free 1- and 2-year degrees, something that President Obama wanted to get done. And then when it comes to 4-year degrees, I would double the Pell Grant so the need meets the help. And that means from $6,000 to $12,000 a year, and then double the income level. I know it doesn't fit on a bumper sticker, but it will work for our economy. And I don't think we should be using hard-earned taxpayer money to send wealthy kids to college, which is exactly what their plans do.
Okay. Governor. Amy, I don't want to sink your candidacy, but I thought that your close tonight was by far the best moment anybody had in the race, and I think a preview for how somebody could effectively run against the president. So you have the ability to do that. What's your strategy between now, not just Tuesday, but as you go beyond, to get yourself from where you are now, 4 or 5%, to being in that top 2 or 3, so that people can start making that contrast between you and Sanders and Buttigieg and maybe Biden if he's still around?
Exactly. I, as I've said, don't have the name ID of these other candidates, and I don't have the bank account. But slowly but surely, I have met every single metric. I think a lot of people didn't even predict I would make it through my speech in the blizzard. They literally thought we couldn't announce in the blizzard. I did it. Then they thought I'd be out by the summer. Then they thought, oh, what's going to happen to her in these debates? And for me, having debates like this is critical. Getting those newspaper endorsements like the New York Times and the 3 big newspapers in New Hampshire, that means something. People read them. They get to know about me and how I can lead. That's my goal. And then I just keep going. I'll be on the debate stage in Nevada. I'll make my case there. I have an excellent record of working on immigration reform. A lot of people talk about it. I've actually worked on it, and I look at it from an economic imperative, and I think that'll be helpful for me out in Nevada.
Great.
Matt? So I got a question when a majority of the country thinks the economy is good and a majority of the country thinks that they're doing well economically, do you think at some point whoever the Democratic nominee is has to at least acknowledge that the economy is going well, but that the race is not fundamentally about whether or not it's doing well, but what's the character of the person in the White House, that we could have both a good economy and a decent person in the White House? Because sometimes I feel Democrats are trying to tell voters what they actually believe isn't right.
Well, I think a lot of people understand that there's jobs out there right now in a lot of parts of the country, including here in New Hampshire. And that's how the president might evaluate it. He might also say, oh, the stock market's going up. Okay. But I look at it in two ways, two major things we have to tackle that he's not doing. One is the shared prosperity, the income inequality, making sure that we have people that are going to fill those jobs of home health care worker that we know we're going to have because we see an aging of our population. That means things he hasn't even talked about. Increasing the minimum wage, doing something about child care, universal health care. Then we have those long-term challenges that are much harder to talk about because maybe they're not the number one thing on voters' mind. But I think there are people out there that are worried about the debt. They're worried about the deficit. I think there's people out there that listen to me when I say we want a president that understands that if you're going to do trade negotiations, that you have to keep your promises and keep your threats with countries like China that see the long term. The underpinnings of our economy when it comes to the farm economy, where we've seen major increases in bankruptcies. So I think it's really, there's two critiques here, and I think they're both real to people, maybe different people, but I can tell you a lot of people don't feel that prosperity. He promised he'd bring down prescription drugs. He said on Fox News he'll bring them down so much it would make your head spin. Well, people's heads are spinning, but it's because they've gone up so much.
Terry?
Senator, one of the things that people have said about the 2016 election is that it showed that sexism is almost as strong as racism still in this country. And we have seen a couple of women candidates, strong women candidates, already drop out. And you hear from voters doubt that America can do that America's ready for that. Do you feel that that is still the case for you in the Democratic Party or beyond? Whatever they tell posters, whatever they tell their kids, when they go to the voting booth, they may not be ready.
I think they are ready because I look at the woman governor of Michigan that just gave the response to the president's State of the Union, Gretchen Whitmer, or Laura Kelly in Kansas. That is a very red state, and she won that race, which means Democrats voted her, but so did independents and moderate Republicans. You look at all these new members of Congress that got elected, many of them very strong women. So I start with those facts. The second thing is I am someone that doesn't talk about this a lot because I've won my elections doing very well with male voters, and I was the first woman in my state in both my jobs as the county attorney and then the senator. And I felt for the first time, getting at what you're talking about, that I needed to address it. I was the first one to bring it up on the debate stage, and that is that 5'4" is not a bad height for a president. That is the height of James Madison. That you don't have to be the skinniest person in the room. I think there's a lot of focus on how women look when they think about who can be the president, and that you don't have to be the loudest voice in the room. So a lot of my argument has been based on merit, and that I'm certainly tough enough, as you can see on the debate stage, to take on this guy, and that in fact maybe we need someone that's not like him and not as rich as him. Maybe we need someone that's very different than him to bring voters in.
Finally, I'll take the last question here. You know, the president's approval rating ticked a little higher with the Gallup poll that came out. And in Iowa, there weren't record numbers of Democrats that came out and caucused. Are you worried that Democratic voters are not fired up enough like they need to be? And is that the fault of the party, the candidates, or Donald Trump?
No, I'm not worried about it. And we know there was all kinds of issues with the caucuses, so I'm not going to take that. I'll look at one other example that is much more profound when you look at the numbers. 2018 election. Talk about fired up. We won in seats all over the country. We flipped the House of Representatives and turned it back into the People's House again. So we had had record turnouts. And what I have seen at our events and rallies, New Year's Eve, Keene, New Hampshire, I had 550 people at 5 o'clock on New Year's Eve. People are excited. They are, maybe some of them are quieter. I remember a voter in Conway, New Hampshire, who was in a line, and everyone had these happy stickers on, you know, I'm a Supreme Court voter, I'm a climate change voter, and he just had a brown jacket on. I said, sir, you don't have a sticker on. And he leans over and he says, that's because I was a Trump voter, and we don't have stickers, and I don't want any of these guys to know because they're my neighbors, and they don't know. But I'm not doing it again. You hear that, and for so many of these moderate Republicans, independents, that we need to build this big coalition, it's not just an economic check, which is what we talk about on the debate stage all the time. It is also a decency check. It is a patriotism check. It is the thought of a president that sits next to Vladimir Putin at an international conference, asked about Russians' interference on election, and makes a joke about it. Those voters that maybe don't agree with everything that we say on the debate stage, I don't agree with everything on the debate stage, they think to themselves, hundreds of thousands of Americans lost their lives on the battlefields fighting for democracy, standing up. 4 little girls at a church in Birmingham, Alabama, they lost their lives, innocents at the height of the civil rights movement, because they were trying to be part of that democracy and people were trying to push it away from them. So we have to remember that it's not one size fits all, and I'm very good at doing that and bringing people in.
Tuesday will be a good test. Undeclared voters can also vote in this primary. We'll see where that motivation, if they're all fired up there. Senator, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for entering the Thunderdome. You're invited anytime you want.
So the Thunderdome, is that what it's called?
I just called that today. Because look at this gang, you know? I mean,
that's right.
He saw the first Road Warrior, and that's all. It's the only movie you've ever seen.
It was either politics or professional wrestling for this crew, so everyone here, except for Yvette. She's nice.
We've been fed for hours.
The debate was in an ice arena, so, you know,
there
I don't think people understood that.
All right,
I
Senator.
felt like I had a home team advantage being in an ice arena.
Definitely have the blood for it. All right, Senator, thank you so much.
You.
Martha Raddatz, I know you have much more up there.
I think we're in the ice arena right now.
Yeah, we're in the ice arena.
It was a hockey. It was a hockey arena right here. It's pretty amazing. We just want to wrap up here, up from our position here, and talk about not just this debate, but this week for Democrats. This was an extraordinary week for Democrats and an extraordinarily bad week for Democrats. We had the acquittal. We had the Iowa caucuses. Isn't it what happened there? Mess, debacle, whatever you want to call it. So when you look at that, Mary, just talk about that week and what it's been
a bruising week. I mean, it feels like it's been 10 weeks in one. And how will Democrats unite and move forward from this? I mean, I think it obviously, as we've been discussing all night, it puts a lot more pressure on what happens here this week. The candidate who wins here in New Hampshire will get that bounce, assuming all goes well, that the candidate was probably hoping for out of Iowa. But it does create this pretty remarkable split screen that we've been talking about, where Democrats seem a bit all over the place. It's not clear who won Iowa. They had this, defeat in Washington with the impeachment, and you have the president with Republicans united behind him. We all saw that rather extraordinary press conference at the White House with all of the Republican leaders there with the president, and he's ready to go. He's ready to fight and move forward. Who he's going to be fighting against is obviously still a big X factor, but Democrats, it makes it hard for them, I think, even harder as they face this challenge of how are they going to beat Donald Trump when it seems like they are still so disjointed.
And John, we can't say how important tonight was in terms of debates. I know there have been lots of debates. This is the 8th debate, right? But this is really crunch time as you go into New Hampshire and after the Iowa caucus debacle.
It is, and it was probably the most spirited debate we've had so far with the Democrats, probably the most substantive debate we've had so far. But I've got to say, to Mary's point, they still have that Democrats have that incredibly unifying factor of Donald Trump. And what a week for Donald Trump. I mean, this was divisive. Donald Trump on the attack. Donald Trump not declaring victory because of what you cited, but Donald Trump talking about payback and retribution in that incredible scene at the State of the Union address and in the East Room 2 days later of the White House, basically going after his opponents in the most personal and divisive ways.
And the Democrats tonight, too, in particular, we heard Joe Biden again right here just a few minutes ago saying he thinks he can defeat him on the issues. Elizabeth Warren a little earlier saying we have to pull our party together and unite. Is that going to beat Donald Trump?
Well, I mean,
mean, I think we'll see. One of the takeaways for me is that this is one of the debates where I think we've seen the most contrasts between them, and you see that in that strategy and how to go after Donald Trump. Look, this is a very fractured party right now, and I think it's a very real possibility that we could be headed all the way into the summer, into the convention, without a nominee still. This is going to be a nasty fight that is nowhere near done, despite the fact that they're already taking the stage down behind us.
Back to the hockey rink very quickly. Back to the
if we don't get out of here soon.
But they, like you heard Vice President Biden today. He already has his sights set on South Carolina. Elizabeth Warren is already looking ahead to Nevada. So yes, you've got the Sanders, you've got the Buttigiegs who really need and want their wins here. Those who've essentially already conceded, which we saw tonight from Joe Biden about New Hampshire, are moving on already.
The underdog. All right, it was great talking with all of you guys tonight, and we'll do it again next time. Back to you, Tom.
All right, Martha, thank you so much for that. Joining us now is businessman and philanthropist Tom Steyer, who was on that debate stage earlier tonight. Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We're calling this tonight the Thunderdome, so you have agreed to take questions from everybody over here.
Nobody comes out the same way.
Is that good, Rum?
It could be.
Tom, I'd like to start because I noticed you leaned into race a lot tonight. You spoke a lot about South Carolina, and a lot of people know South Carolina as a firewall, if you will, for former Vice President Joe Biden, and you were aggressive after him. Do you think you can make a play in South Carolina?
Look, right now, I'm doing pretty well with black people in South Carolina. I think I'm getting something like a quarter of the black vote. I've spent a lot of time there. My family spent a lot of time there. We have a lot of people on the ground. And I speak straightforwardly about race. My attitude is there is no policy area in the United States of America that does not have a substantial, important, and often neglected subtext of race. And, the example I always use is I'm a big climate bug, but I go at climate from the standpoint of environmental justice, the communities, overwhelmingly black and brown, where it's unsafe to breathe because you'll get asthma, and you can't drink the water that comes out of the tap because you'll get sick. And if we start in those communities and solve the problems of clean air and clean water for them with leadership from those communities, we'll get climate just fine.
Yvette, we were talking about this earlier tonight, right after the debate. What would you want to ask Tom?
A couple things. I mean, you had some great moments. You were a unifier at times, stepping back, saying, hey, I agree with you guys, but we've got to figure this out because we got to beat Donald Trump. The moment with Biden was a big moment. You literally called him on the carpet about a very clear issue. Can you talk more about that and what that felt like in that moment?
One of his big supporters in South Carolina, Dick Harpootlian, made a racist comment about someone associated with our campaign. And the Legislative Black Caucus came out and supported Jerry Govan and our campaign and asked him to disavow the remarks and the person. And all I was saying was, look, Mr. Vice President, please do the right thing and stand with us in the Legislative Black Caucus. This is a straightforward question. Please do the right thing.
And to be fair, the Vice President did say that person he believes is going to apologize for whatever happened. He did say that on the stage at that point. I just want to be clear because Vice President Biden's not here to sort of
look.
give that
I didn't understand exactly what happened in all fairness. I still believe that Joe Biden will do the right thing. I'm hoping that he will do the right thing. But I think it's important when you see racism to stand up against it on the biggest stage you can find. And this is not the first time I've seen it. And so there was no way I was going to let racism pass and just think, okay, it's impolite to bring it up. If we let the races win, if we don't stand up to them, they win. So we got to say it every time.
Amen. I agree. You made the case about reparations, and since Marianne Williamson has left the debate stage, we really haven't had many people making such a clear statement about reparations. Can you talk about that, and then I'll relinquish the microphone.
Look, I think one of the things that people feel is that we can't deal explicitly with race, that race is something that is somehow too awkward and painful to discuss, and that everything's fair now, so let the competition ensue. That's the Republican point of view. Look, we've had explicitly racist policies in this country for 400 years. I mean, My wife and I started a bank to try and undo the discrepancies and racism in the financial system to support businesses owned by women, black people, and Latinos because they were so discriminated against in the financial world, and it continues. So the idea that we can talk about equality in America without talking about race is nonsense. And I think that every time people try and sweep it under the rug, they're doing a disservice to the country. We need to talk about it openly. We need to, I keep saying, we need to tell the narrative truthfully, and then we need to repair the damage, and that's the only way we move forward as the country we want to be and the country we claim to be, which is the center of freedom, justice, and equality. Okay, let's do it.
Ram?
Tom, I mean, you have talked passionately about climate change and very passionately about race. Did your investments when you were in the private sector, did your investments in the companies you invest in reflect those same values, both on the issue of race and on climate change?
I would say this. We started, and I'm answering you. Yeah. We started investing in everything, Ram, because I believe basically that in America, if something was wrong, the government fixed it. And a couple of times I made mistakes, including in fossil fuels. People keep bringing up that I invested in fossil fuels, which we did, not exclusively, not as high as the percentage in the economy, but we did. And then I realized, oh my God, no one got on a school bus and went to school to try and create global warming, but it turns out there's an unintended consequence. So I divested from fossil fuels. I walked away from my business because I said, look, I want to make sure that, in fact, all the things that I believe in are true. And I made those decisions long before I was running for office on a moral basis. Look, I divested from fossil fuels. I figured this out 12, 14 years ago. I'm asking Americans to do exactly what I did then, which is this. No one, bought a car so they could heat up the planet and make it unlivable. But we have to understand we have to change. We have to move to clean energy. And that's exactly what I did.
Is that also true on race? You're talking about climate change all here. I asked about both topics.
I think I made one decision that I thought was a mistake on, which had to do with, at the very beginning of the private prisons, someone tried to convince me that they would be more effective and deliver better service for lower cost. I owned it for a tiny period of time. I thought, no, this is morally wrong. So I just got rid of it. Okay. I got rid of it because I figured out that was wrong. And I've worked subsequently in California to make sure we got rid of private prisons, not only in terms of incarceration, but in terms of detention. So when I make a mistake, then I deal with it. And I made those decisions. I didn't do it a week before I started running for president. I was at the very front 15 years ago figuring out, okay, I know this isn't right, and I acted.
Tom, to clarify that point, though, because it sounded a little odd, the for-profit prisons, you got out of it because originally you thought they were going to be more effective to help rehabilitate people or to turn a profit quicker?
To rehabilitate people. Look, Ram has asked me a question of, did you try and do the right thing when you were an investor? And I did. And a couple of times I realized something was wrong, so I divested it and moved on, and I've worked in both those cases very effectively to make sure that the values that I came to were right, and I came to them fast, and I came to ahead of everybody else.
Governor?
Tom, first off, thank you for taking questions from us. You and Senator Klobuchar did. Senator Warren and Mayor Buttigieg did not.
But I don't know if we offered that to them. I don't know if we offered the Thunderdome to them, to be honest.
Mayor, but anyway,
when would I ever turn down the chance to talk to someone from Jersey?
That's exactly right.
I'd have to be nuts.
You would absolutely have to be, and I'm glad you're not.
You know that.
Well, that's right, but he would be nuts to not interact with someone like us.
Come on.
You're talking tonight, I think, based on both the questions you got on issues of race and opportunity. I thought you spoke rather eloquently a couple times tonight about creating opportunity. So on that score, where do you sit on school choice and on giving kids in urban areas who are in some failing government schools and their families an opportunity to have broader choice that maybe my family and your family have had if they wanted to avail ourselves of it?
So, Chris, I don't know if you know this, but my mom taught in the New York public schools.
Didn't know.
Yeah. And then after she retired, she went and taught prisoners at the Brooklyn House of Detention. My brother, actually, who Ram knows, graduated from high school early to go and to help my mom in the public schools before he went to college. He's been a child advocate for at-risk children as a career, and he's older than I am. So let me say this. I am completely committed to the idea of education of kids, not just being the future prosperity of America, which it is, but also the engine for mobility and justice in this country. Number one statistic for success in the United States of America, third grade reading comprehension. I take this seriously at a level that I didn't get a chance to say tonight. And let me say, there's a huge racial component to this. And I am willing to change completely the amount of money we spend on this. That's why I brought up $700 billion for defense, $70 billion for education. Are you kidding me?
And that's why
and I'm going to answer your question. Yep. But I believe the way that we repair this is through the public school system. I have seen these charter schools. I don't believe they address the basic problems. I'm not someone who hates unions. I love teachers. I believe teachers run the schools. I want to back them. I want to support them, not just with higher pay. I want to support them with support services like crazy things like nurses and librarians. You cannot, I don't think we can overemphasize as a country our commitment to 3-year-old kids across the spectrum, to subsidize childcare for moms. To me, the fact that we spend $700 billion on defense, trillions of dollars on wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and $70 billion on the kids of America, that just has to be wrong. And, you know, to me, the real question is, how do we get the bulk of these schools to work? How do we work with the teachers to make it happen? How do we make sure that those schools serve the kids? Because if third grade reading comprehension is the number, you can't start in third grade. My brother's been telling me, Rom knows him, he's got a big mouth.
Well, I mean, the truth is kids drop out of college in third grade.
Yes, before. And my point is, my brother's been yelling at me, and he's got a big mouth.
That I can confirm.
Isn't it true? Yeah. That if you don't get the kids by 3, you're probably too late, and if you don't get them by 5, you are too late.
All right.
And I'm committed. I know you're committed to this.
Tom
So
Steyer,
am I.
thank you so much. I'm sorry we're coming off the air right now. If you're watching ABC News Live, a rebroadcast of the debate, thanks so much for watching the best team in politics.
Thanks, Tom.
This is what being live